Part 2, Chapter 19 of The Keeper of the Door by Ethel Dell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 19. A Fight Without a Finish. It was not the same Olga who went back into the busy little Anglo-Indian community at Sharapura after the breaking of her engagement, though it was only those intimate with her who marked the change. To the rest of the world she was as she had ever been, quiet and gentle, perhaps a little colorless, possibly in the eyes of some even insignificant. Too reserved to be interesting, according to Colonel Bradlaugh, who liked a woman to have plenty of vivacity and mirth in her composition. To those who knew her best, to Nick, to Daisy, and to Noel, she was changed, though it was a change of which she herself was scarcely aware. Her reawakened spontaneity had gone again. She asked sympathy of none. Even to Nick she made no confidences. She had become wholly woman, and she had learned, as it were, to stand alone. She preferred her solitude. Of Noel she seemed a little shy at first, until by frank good fellowship he overcame this. Noel's courtship was apparently at a standstill. He made no open attempt to further his cause with her, though every day he sought her out with cheery friendliness, never overstepping the mark, never giving her the smallest occasion for embarrassment. And thus every day her confidence in him grew. She came to rely upon him in a fashion that she scarcely realized, depending upon his consideration and unfailing chivalry more than she knew. She had never liked him better than she liked him then, in the first desperate bitterness of her trouble. He asked so little of her, was so readily pleased with her mere friendship, and though at the back of her mind she knew that this was only his pleasant method of marking time, she was none the less grateful to him for his patience. He helped her through her dark hours without seeming in the least aware that she needed help. He demanded rather than offered sympathy, and in giving it she found herself oddly soothed. She was glad that Noel wanted her, glad that he regarded her cooperation as quite indispensable to his schemes. He occupied her thoughts at a time when private reflection was torture. The misery was there perpetually at her heart, but he gave her no time to dwell upon it. He carried her along with him, with an impetus which she had no desire to resist. Nick watched his tactics from afar with unwilling admiration, wryly admitting to himself that they were precisely the tactics he would have pursued. He saw that the fulfillment of his prediction was merely a matter of time, and prepared himself to yield to the inevitable with as good a grace as he could muster. He was in fact more in sympathy with Noel than with Olga just then. The boy was undoubtedly developing under this new influence. The spoilt side of his nature was giving place to a new manliness that was infinitely more attractive, and Nick found it impossible not to accept him with approval. Sir Reginald Bassett's visit was to take place early in February, and great were the preparations in progress for his entertainment. Daisy Musgrave found herself swept into the vortex of Noel's energies, and she on her part did her best to interest her guest therein. It was a futile effort on her part. Hunt-Goring only laughed at her and paid her lazy compliments. Why he stayed on was a problem that she was wholly at a loss to solve. Quite privately she had begun to wish very much that he would go. She was heartily tired of being forever on her guard, and she never dared to be otherwise with him. Not that she found it really difficult to keep him at a distance. He was too indolent for that. When she withdrew herself he never troubled to pursue. His attentions were never ardent. But he never failed to take advantage of the smallest lapse on her part. She could never be at her ease with him. Will Musgrave was inclined to smile at his wife's difficulties. Perhaps he was not wholly sorry that the follies of her youth should thus come home to her. He did not like Hunt-Goring much, but the man never gave offence. "I suppose he'll go when he's tired of us," said Will philosophically. "And meantime neither Olga nor Noel will come near the place with him in it," sighed Daisy. "I don't believe he will ever go." He laughed at that and pinched her cheek. "We shall, though, little wife. That honeymoon of ours comes nearer every day." She smiled an eager girlish smile. "Dear old Will," she murmured softly. It was on that same evening that Noel broke his rule and raced in to give Daisy some important information with regard to his schemes for what he termed the Bassett week. He was full of excitement, and declared himself unable to remain for a single moment more than his business demanded. "I'm going to dine with Nick," he told her. "In fact, I'm due there now." "I never see anything of Nick nowadays," said Daisy. "No? Nor do I. He's at the Palace, morning, noon, and night. Can't see the attraction myself. But no doubt he thinks he's doing something great. By the way, you're coming round to Old Badger's to-morrow, I suppose? We are going to hold a meeting of the committee. Olga will be there, of course." "How is Olga?" asked Daisy. "Oh, all right. Why don't you go round and see her?" Noel asked the question with some curiosity. He had begun to wonder lately if there could have been a disagreement between them. Daisy smiled with a touch of wistfulness. She had scarcely seen Olga since the breaking of her engagement. "I seem to have so little time nowadays. The last time I went she was busy, too." "Oh, she's sure to be busy till Bassett week," laughed Noel. "I'm seeing to that. It's good for her, you know." "Yes, I know," said Daisy. She added in a lower tone, for Hunt-Goring was smoking on the veranda outside the window, "I am glad you are taking care of her, Noel. She needs that." Noel colored a little. "I do what I can. So does Nick. But I wish you would go and see her. She wants a pal of her own sex." "I am not so sure of that," said Daisy. "Ah, here's Peggy. I thought you wouldn't escape without seeing her." Peggy's entrance was of the nature of a whirlwind. It completely diverted the thoughts of both. She was scantily clad in a bath towel, which she held tightly gripped with both hands about her small person. Her feet left little wet dabs on the floor as she pattered in. "Oh, Noel," she cried. "You horrid, horrid Noel. I've been callin' you for ever so long. And I was in my bath. I thought you'd like to see me in my bath." "Peggy!" exclaimed her mother, scandalized. Peggy's ayah, also scandalized, hovered in the doorway. Peggy herself, from the safe shelter of Noel's arms, smiled securely upon both. "You mustn't tickle me," she said to her protector, "or I shall come undone. Why hasn't you been to take me for another ride, Noel?" "Sweetheart," he began, with compunction. But Peggy interrupted very decidedly. "No, you needn't make excuses. And I'm not going to be your sweetheart any more, ever. Not till you take me for another ride." "Oh, don't be cruel," besought Noel. "I've been so shockingly busy lately. It wasn't that I forgot you, Peggy. I couldn't do that if I tried. So give me a kiss, little sweetheart, and let's be friends. I vow I'll tickle you if you won't." Peggy, however, was nothing daunted by this threat. She kept her face rigidly turned over his shoulder. "When will you take me for another ride?" she demanded imperiously. "Peggy!" her mother broke in again. "I can't have you behaving like this, dear. It isn't decent. Go back to ayah at once." Peggy peeped mischievously over Noel's shoulder. "If I get down again, I shall come all undone," she said. "By Jove, what a calamity!" said Noel. "Haven't you got a pin or something to hold the thing together?" She tightened her arms about his neck. "You carry me back," she whispered ingratiatingly, "and I'll give you 3 boo-ful kisses." Noel succumbed at once. "Can't resist that," he remarked to Daisy. "I'll take her back and slap her for you, shall I?" "I wish you would," said Daisy. "He daren't," declared Peggy. "Oh, daren't he?" laughed Noel. "That's the rashest thing you've ever said in your life. Come along, you Scaramouche, and we'll see about that." He bore her away with her draperies slipping from her, followed by the ayah, whose open horror was surveyed by Peggy with eyes of shining amusement. A little later her shrill squeals announced the fact that Noel was carrying out his threat after a fashion which she found highly enjoyable, and Noel subsequently emerged in a somewhat heated and tumbled condition, and bade Daisy a hasty farewell. "I've chastised the imp, but she's quite unregenerate. Glad I'm not her mother. I've sworn a solemn oath to take her out on the chimpanzee to-morrow. I haven't time, but that's a detail. I'll work it somehow, if you don't mind having her ready by 10. I'll race round after parade." "I ought not to let her go," Daisy protested. He laughed at that. "Yes, yes, you must. I've promised. Good bye. 10 o'clock, then." He shook her hand and departed, singing as he went. Hunt-Goring, from the veranda, watched him all unperceived. "The whelp seems pleased with himself," he observed to Daisy with a sneering smile. "I presume that fortune, in the form of Miss Olga Ratcliffe, favours the brave?" "He's very handsome, isn't he?" said Daisy, smiling back, not without a touch of malice. "Who could help favouring such an Adonis?" "Not you, I'm sure," said Hunt-Goring, "or the charming Peggy either. But I'm a little sorry for the red-haired doctor, you know. I feel in a measure responsible for that tragedy." "The responsibility was mine," said Daisy gravely. He turned his lazy eyes upon her. "Ah, to be sure. You wanted an excuse to procure that young man his congé, I believe. I hope you realize that you are in my debt for just so much as the excuse was worth." Daisy made a quick movement of exasperation. "Do you never give women credit for being sincere?" she said. "Only when they are angry," said Hunt-Goring, taking out his cigarette case. "Now join me, won't you? Sincerity is such a heating quality. I shouldn't cultivate it if I were you." But Daisy declined somewhat curtly. It was quite evident that her patience was wearing very thin. Hunt-Goring did not press her. He smiled, and subsided with obvious indifference. Perhaps he deemed it wiser not to try her too far, or perhaps he lacked the energy to pursue the matter. He had taken to spending most of his time on the veranda, smoking his endless cigarettes and dreamily watching the world go by. He seemed almost to have forgotten that he was a guest, and her exasperation notwithstanding, Daisy could not bring herself to remind him of the fact. For the man was changed. Day after day she realized it more and more clearly. Day after day it seemed to her that he dropped a little deeper into his sea of lethargy. His interest flagged so quickly where once it had been keen. He grew daily older while she watched; and a curious pity for him kept her from actively disliking him, although his power to attract her was wholly gone. She found herself bearing with him simply because he cared so little. It was quite otherwise with Noel, who was frankly disgusted to find himself confronted with him on the following morning when, true to his promise, he made his appearance with Peggy's mount. Hunt-Goring was just preparing to establish himself on the veranda when Noel came striding along it in search of his small playmate. They so nearly collided, in fact, that it was impossible for either to overlook the other's presence. Noel drew back sharply with his quick scowl. They had not met since the evening on which he had so furiously challenged him to battle on Olga's behalf. For Olga's sake, and perhaps a little in deference to Max's warning, he had refrained from following up the challenge, but he was more than ready to do so even yet. And his attitude said as much, as he stood aside in glowering silence for the other man to pass. Hunt-Goring, however, was plainly in a genial mood. He paused to bestow his smiling scrutiny upon the young officer. "Let me see. Surely we have met before." "We have," said Noel bluntly. "I fear the occasion has slipped my memory," said Hunt-Goring. A wiser man would have passed on. But Noel had not yet attained to years of discretion. He stood his ground and explained. "We met at dinner here. Captain and Miss Ratcliffe were here too. And my brother." I remember now. Quite an amusing evening, was it not?" Hunt-Goring laughed gently. "You were rather vexed with me for chaffing her about her engagement. I have always thought a little chaff was legitimate on such occasions." "When it isn't objectionable," said Noel gruffly. Hunt-Goring laughed again. "Do you know why the engagement was broken off?" Noel drew himself up sharply. "That, sir, is neither your affair nor mine." Hunt-Goring took out his cigarette case. "Well, it was mine, in a way. he observed complacently. "I pulled the strings, you know." "Ah!" It was an exclamation of anger rather than of surprise. The blood mounted in a great wave to Noel's forehead. He looked suddenly dangerous. "I guessed it was your doing," he said in a furious undertone. Hunt-Goring continued to smile. "He wasn't a very suitable parti for her, my dear fellow. There was a certain episode in his past that wouldn't bear too close an investigation. Very possibly you have not been let into that secret. Your brother was not over anxious to have it noised abroad." Noel's hands were clenched. He seemed to be restraining himself from a violent outburst with immense difficulty. "My brother," he said with emphasis, "is the gentleman of our family. He has never yet done anything that couldn't have been proclaimed from the housetops." Hunt-Goring uttered his sneering laugh. "What touching loyalty! My dear fellow, your brother is the biggest blackguard of you all, if you only knew it. You lie!" Violently came the words. They were as the sudden bursting of the storm. Something electric seemed suddenly to have entered into Noel. He became, as it were, galvanized by fury. But still Hunt-Goring laughed. "Oh, not on this occasion, I assure you. I have too little at stake. I wonder why you imagined the engagement was broken off. I suppose your brother gave you a reason of sorts." Noel's eyes shone red. "He gave me to understand that you had had a hand in it. I guessed it, in fact. I knew what an infernal blackguard you were." "Order, order!" smiled Hunt-Goring. "After all, my share in the matter was a very small one. Most men have a past, you know. When you have lived a little longer you will recognize that. So he didn't tell you why he had been thrown over? Left you to make your own inferences, I suppose. Or perhaps she made the flattering suggestion that she had bestowed her affections upon someone more captivating. I fancy she is wisely determined to secure as good a bargain as possible, for which one can scarcely blame her. And a man with so lively a past as your brother's would scarcely be a safe partner for one who values peace and prosperity." "How dare you make these vile insinuations in my hearing?" burst forth Noel. "Do you think I'm made of sawdust? Tell me what you mean, or else retract every single word you've said." Hunt-Goring held up a cigarette between his fingers and looked at it. The fury of Noel's attitude scarcely seemed to reach his notice. He leaned against the balustrade of the veranda, still faintly smiling. "I would tell you the whole story with pleasure," he said, "only I am not quite sure that it would be good for you to know." "Oh, damn all that!" broke in Noel, goaded to exasperation by his obvious indifference. "If you want to save your skin, you'd better speak out at once." "To save my skin?" Hunt-Goring's eyes left their contemplation of the cigarette and travelled to his face. They held a sneer that was well nigh intolerable, and yet which somehow restrained Noel for the moment. "What a very headlong young man you are," pursued Hunt-Goring in his soft voice. "I've done nothing to you. I haven't the smallest desire to quarrel with you. Nor have I given you any occasion for offence. It was Mrs. Musgrave, not I, who imparted the regrettable tale of your brother's shortcomings to his fiancée. In some fashion she conceived it to be her duty to do so." "You meant her to do it?" flashed back Noel. "Ah, that is another story," smiled Hunt-Goring. "We are not discussing motives or intentions, I think. But she will tell you, if you care to ask her, that I advised her strongly against the course she elected to pursue." "You would?" said Noel bitterly. "Well, get on. Let's hear this precious story. I've no doubt it's a damned lie from beginning to end, but if it's going the round I'd better know it." "It may be a lie," said Hunt-Goring diplomatically, "but it was not concocted by me. I should conclude, however, from subsequent events, that some portion of it bears at least some sort of resemblance to the truth." He stopped to light his cigarette while Noel looked on fuming. The story is a very ordinary one, but might well prove somewhat damning to a doctor's career. It concerned a young lady with whom your brother was somewhat intimate." "Did you know her?" thrust in Noel. Hunt-Goring looked at the end of his cigarette with a thoughtful smile. "Yes, I knew her rather well. I was not, however, prepared to lend my name to cloak a scandal, even to oblige your brother, who had transferred his attentions to Miss Olga, so he had to take his own measures." He looked up with a glitter of malice in his eyes. "The girl died," he said, "rather suddenly. That's all the story." It was received in a dead silence that lasted for the breathless passage of a dozen seconds. Then, "You skunk!" said Noel. He did not raise his voice to say it, but there was that in his tone that was more emphatic than violence. It warned Hunt-Goring of danger as surely as the growl of a tiger. His lazy complacence suddenly gave place to alertness. He straightened himself up. But even then he had not the sense to refrain from his abominable laugh. "I've noticed," he said, "that present-day puppies are greater at snarling than fighting. I told you this story because you asked for it. Now I'll tell you one you didn't ask for. Max Wyndham transferred his attentions to Olga Ratcliffe, not because he cared for her, but because he wanted to put a spoke in my wheel. Little Olga and I were very thick at one time. You didn't know that, I dare say." "I don't believe it," said Noel, breathing heavily. Hunt-Goring inhaled a deep breath of smoke and blew it forth again in gentle puffs. "Ah, she never told you that. She was always a secretive young woman. Yes, we had some very jolly times together on the sly, till one day the doctor fellow caught us kissing under the apple trees. Then, of course, she was afraid he'd split, so it was all up." He smiled insolently into Noel's blazing eyes. "I flatter myself that she missed those stolen kisses," he said. "I must go round one of these days, when the dragon is out of earshot, and make up for it." That loosed the devil in Noel at last. He took a swift step forward. His right hand gripped his riding whip. "If you ever go near her again," he said, "I'll break every bone in your body. You liar! You damned blackguard! You cur!" Full into Hunt-Goring's face he hurled his furious words. He was more angry in that moment than he had ever been in his life. The force of his anger carried him along as a twig borne on a racing current. Till that instant he had forgotten that he carried his riding whip. The sudden remembrance of it flashed like a streak of lightning through his brain. Before he knew what he was doing, almost as if a will swifter than his own were at work, he had sprung upon Hunt-Goring and struck him a swinging blow across the shoulders. Only that one blow, however, for Hunt-Goring was not an easy man to thrash. 10 years before he had been the strongest man in his regiment, and he was powerful still. Before Noel could strike again, he was locked in an embrace that threatened to crush him to a pulp. In awful silence they strained and fought together, and in a second or two it came to Noel, through the silence, that he had met his match. The Irish blood in him leaped exultant to the fray. He laughed a breathless laugh, and braced his muscles to a fierce resistance. He had been spoiling for a fight with this man for a long time. But it was impossible to do anything scientific in that constrictor-like hold, and as they swayed and strove he began to realize that unless he could break it, it would very speedily break him. Hunt-Goring's face, purple and devilish, with lips drawn back and teeth clenched upon his cigarette, glared into his own. There was something unspeakably horrible about the eyes. They turned upwards, showing the whites all shot with blood. "The man's a maniac," was the thought that ran through Noel's brain. His heart had begun to pump with painful hammering strokes. Not much of a fight, this. Rather a grim struggle for life against a power he could not break. He braced himself again to burst that deadly grip. In his ears there arose a great surging. He felt his own eyes begin to start. By heaven! Was he going to be squeezed to death ignominiously on the strength of that single blow? He gathered himself together for one mighty effort, the utmost of which he was capable, to force those iron arms asunder. For about 6 seconds they stood the strain, holding him like a vice. Then very suddenly they parted, so suddenly that Noel almost staggered as he drew his first great gasp of relief. Hunt-Goring reeled, almost fell, back against the wall of the bungalow. The sweat was streaming down his forehead. His face was livid. His eyes, sinister and awful, were turned up like the eyes of a dead man. He was chewing at his cigarette with a ceaseless working of the jaws indescribably horrible to watch. Noel realized on the instant that the struggle was over, with small satisfaction to either side. He stood breathing deeply, all the mad blood in him racing at fever speed through his veins, burning to follow up the attack, but conscious that he could not do so. For the man who leaned there facing him was old, a bitter fact which neither had realized until that moment. Too old to fight, too old to thrash. Noel swung round and turned his back upon him, utterly disgusted with the situation. He picked up his riding whip with a savage gesture and stared at it with fierce regret. It was a serviceable weapon. He could have done good work with it on a younger man. Hunt-Goring made a sudden movement, and he wheeled back. The livid look had gone from the man's face. He stood upright and spat the cigarette from his lips. His eyes had drooped again, showing only a malicious glint between the lids. Yet there was something about him even then that made Noel aware that he was very near the end of his strength. He was on the verge of speaking when there came the sudden rush of Peggy's eager feet, and she darted out upon the veranda, and raced to Noel with a squeal of delight. Noel caught her in his arms. He had never been more pleased to see her. He did not look at Hunt-Goring again, and the words on Hunt-Goring's lips remained unspoken. "Let's go, let's go!" cried Peggy. And Noel turned as if the atmosphere had suddenly become poisonous, and bore her swiftly away. A few seconds later, Daisy, running out to see the start, came upon Hunt-Goring upright and motionless upon the veranda, and was somewhat surprised by the rigidity of his attitude. He relaxed almost at once, however, and sat down in his usual corner. "I had no idea Noel was here," she said. "Has he been waiting long?" "Not long," said Hunt-Goring. "I have been entertaining him." "Isn't he a nice boy?" said Daisy impetuously. "Look at him in the saddle. So splendidly young and free." Hunt-Goring was silent a moment. Then, as he took out his cigarette case, he remarked, "He is so altogether charming, Mrs. Musgrave, that I can't help thinking that he must be one of those fortunate people whom the gods love." "But what a horrid thing to say!" protested Daisy. "I'm sure Noel won't die young. He is so full of vitality. He couldn't." Hunt-Goring smiled upon his cigarettes. "I wonder," he said slowly, and chose one with the words, "I wonder." End of chapter 19. Part 2, Chapter 20, of The Keeper of the Door by Ethel Dell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 20. The Power of the Enemy. It so chanced that Noel did not find himself in any intimate conversation with Olga again until the great week arrived, and General Sir Reginald Bassett came upon the scene with much military pomp and ceremony. Olga avoided all talk of a confidential nature with him with so obvious a reluctance that he could not force it upon her in the brief spaces of time which he had at his disposal when they met. They had become close friends, but the feeling that this friendship depended mainly upon his forbearance never left Noel, and he could not fail to see that she shrank from the bare mention of Max's name. He bided his time, therefore, since there was no urgent need to broach the subject forthwith, and he was still by no means sure of his ground. He would have discussed the matter with Nick, but Nick was never to be found. He came and went with astonishing rapidity, bewildering even Olga by the suddenness of his moves. Vaguely she heard of unrest in the city, but definite information she had none. Nick eluded all inquiries, But it seemed to her that the yellow face grew more wrinkled every day, and the shrewd eyes took on a vigilant, sleepless look that troubled her much in secret. The thought of him kept her from brooding overmuch upon her own trouble. She did not want to brood. If her own nights were sleepless, she took a book and resolutely read. She would not yield an inch to the ceaseless weary ache of her heart, and very sternly she denied herself the relief of tears. Too much of her life had been wasted already in the pursuit of what was not. She would not waste still more of it in bitter, fruitless mourning over that which was. Perhaps it was the bravest stand she had ever made, and what it cost her not even Nick might guess. Certainly he had less time to bestow upon her than ever before. They met at meals, and very often that was all. But Olga, with her curious new reserve, was not needing his companionship just then. Her attitude towards her beloved hero had subtly changed. Beloved he was still, and would ever be, but he no longer dwelt apart from all other men on the special little pedestal on which her worship had placed him. He was no longer the demigod of her childish adoration. Olga had grown up, and was shedding her illusions one by one. Nick was a man, and she was a woman. Therefore it followed as a natural sequence that, though she was fully capable of understanding him, she herself was, and must ever remain, a being beyond his comprehension. Not superior to him, Olga never aspired to be that, but with her woman's knowledge she realized that even Nick had his limitations. There were certain corners of her soul which he could never penetrate. He would have understood the wild crying of her heart, but her steady stifling of that crying would have been beyond him. Simply he stood on another plane, and he would not understand that her heart must break before she could listen to its passionate entreaty. Nor could she explain herself to him. She belonged to the inexplicable and unreasonable race called woman. Her motives and emotions were hidden, and she could never hope to make them understood even by the shrewdest of men. So she veiled her sorrow from him, little guessing how the vigilant eyes took in that also when they did not apparently so much as glance her way. On the morning of the day on which Sir Reginald was to arrive, he kept her waiting for breakfast, a most unusual occurrence. Olga was occupied with a letter from her father, one of his brief, kindly epistles that she valued for their very rarity, and it was not till this was finished that she realized the lateness of the hour. Then in some surprise she went along the veranda in search of him. His window stood open, as usual. She paused outside it. "Nick, aren't you coming?" There was no reply to her call, and she was about to repeat it when Kasur, the Khitmutgar, came along the veranda behind her. "Miss Sahib, Ratcliffe Sahib, has not yet come back from the city," he said. Olga turned in astonishment. "The city, Kasur? How long has he been there? When did he go?" The man looked at her with the deferential vagueness which only the Oriental can express. "Miss Sahib, how should I know? My lord goes in the night while his servant is asleep." "In the night?" Again incredulously she repeated his words. "And to the city? Kasur, are you sure?" Kasur became more vague. "Perhaps he goes to the cantonments, Miss Sahib. How should I know whither he goes?" It was an unsatisfactory conversation, obviously leading in every direction but the one desired. Olga turned from him, impatient and perplexed. She went slowly back round the corner of the bungalow to the breakfast table, set in the shade of the cluster roses that climbed over the veranda, and sat down before it with a sinking heart. What did this mean? Was it true that Nick went nightly and by stealth to the city? What did he do there? And how came he to be there at this hour? Moment by moment her uneasiness grew. The conviction that Nick was in danger came down upon her like a bird of evil omen, and inaction became intolerable. She turned in her chair with the intention of calling to Kasur, to order her horse that she might go in search of him. But in that instant a voice spoke to her from the compound immediately below her, arresting the words on her lips, a whining, ingratiating voice. "Mem Sahib," it said, "Mem Sahib." She looked down and saw an old man, more like a monkey than a human being, standing huddled in a ragged chudda on the edge of the path. He seemed to be looking at her, obviously he must have seen her sitting there, and yet to Olga his eyes looked blind. They stared straight up at the sky while he spoke, and there was a dreadful paleness about them, a lifeless hue that contrasted very strangely with the deep copper of his bearded face. "Do not be alarmed, most gracious," he begged in a thin, reedy voice. "I come with a message from the Captain Sahib. He has been detained in the city, but all is well with him. He bids me to say that he desires the mem to eat alone this morning, but to have no fear. He will be with her again ere the sun has reached its height." Olga leaned upon the balustrade of the veranda and looked down at her strange visitor. She was not sorry that she was thus raised above him, for he was very dirty. The voluminous chuddah in which he was swathed looked as if it had wrapped him in those self-same folds for many years. "But what is the Sahib doing?" she asked. "Why doesn't he come?" The old man wagged a deferential beard. "Excellency, how should a poor old seller of moonstones know?" "Oh." Olga suddenly became interested in the messenger. "You are the moonstone seller, are you?" she said. "Have you ever been here before?" He bent himself before her in a low salaam. "I am my lord's most humble servant," he told her meekly. "A very poor man, most gracious. A very poor man. I come here at my lord's bidding, when he needs me." Olga's brow puckered. "How queer," she said. "I wonder I have never seen you before. Perhaps you only come at night." "Only at night, most gracious," he said. He made as if he would hobble away, but she called to him to wait, while she ran to her room to fetch a few annas for him. It took her but a second or two to find what she wanted, but when she emerged again upon the veranda her visitor had disappeared. She stood and searched the compound with astonished eyes, but no sign of him was visible. He must have removed himself with considerable rapidity for so old a man, and remembering his extreme poverty Olga was puzzled. She had never known a native run away from baksheesh before. She sat down to her solitary breakfast, no longer actively anxious concerning Nick, but still by no means easy. She was firmly convinced that he was running risks in the city, and she longed to have him back. The morning dragged away. She would not leave the bungalow lest he should return in her absence. She busied herself with the making of a fancy dress which she and her ayah had concocted for the coming ball at the mess house. It was to be quite an important affair, and every European within reach was to attend, according to Noel's decree. He had persuaded his colonel to have a purely European function for once, pleading that it would be so much more like home. And Colonel Bradlaugh, albeit with hesitation, had yielded the point. So to that one night's entertainment no native guests had been invited. Noel was looking forward to the event with an enthusiasm that simply swept Olga along with it. She could not help being interested, and in a measure excited. It was an absolute impossibility to be lukewarm about anything over which Noel was enthusiastic. He kindled enthusiasm wherever he went. Native fancy dresses were tabooed by the regulations. Noel was supremely contemptuous of all things native. He meant to go as Dick Turpin himself, and she had promised to support him in a dress of the same period. It had taken considerable thought and skill to manufacture, but it was now well on the road to completion, and she sat and stitched at it throughout the morning, trying to stifle her uneasiness in the attention which it demanded. It was not an easy matter. She found herself starting at every sound, and pausing to listen with nerves on edge. Still she persisted, determined not to give way to them. And she was in fact gradually schooling herself to a calmer frame of mind, when suddenly a thing happened that bereft her in a moment of all the composure she had striven so hard to attain. A man's hand shot swiftly and stealthily from behind her and covered her eyes in a flash, while a man's voice, soft and exultant, said mockingly above her head, "Guess." Olga uttered a cry that would have been a shriek had not the hand very swiftly shifted its position from her eyes to her mouth. She looked up into a face she knew, a face whose eyes of evil triumph made her heart stand still, and all her strength went suddenly from her. She turned as white as death, and sank back into the chair from which she had half risen. The total unexpectedness of the thing deprived her of all powers of resistance. She sat as one stunned. He took his hand from her lips and brutally kissed them, laughing as she shrank from him in sick horror. The gleaming mockery of his eyes was a thing she dared not meet. "You will never guess what I have come for," he said, hanging over her, his hand gripping both of hers, his face still horribly near. Her lips moved voicelessly in answer. She could not utter a word. "You're awfully pleased to see me, aren't you?" he said. "That's nice of you. I wonder when you mean to pay that debt of yours, that old, sweet debt." He spoke softly, smilingly, his eyes devouring her the while. She closed her own to avoid them. Her heart did not seem to be beating at all. She felt as if she were going to die of sheer horror there in his arms. Softly again his voice came to her. "Come, you mustn't faint. That wouldn't be at all good for you. Open your eyes. Don't be afraid. Open them." They opened, quiveringly, almost against her will. He was holding her closely, as if he anticipated some sudden resistance. But his eyes were on her still, burningly, possessively, menacingly. She met them, shrinking, and felt as if thereby she gave herself to him body and soul. He began to laugh again. That soft, silky laugh. "You're such a silly child," he said. "You always expect the worst. It's not wise of you. Aren't you old enough to know that yet?" She found her voice at last, and with it came the consciousness of the slow, slow beating of her heart. "Let me go," she said in a breathless whisper. "Presently, on one condition," he said. "No, now." The beating had begun to quicken a little, to harden into a distinct throbbing. But she felt deadly cold. Her hands, powerless in that unrelenting grasp, were as ice. "Now don't be foolish," said Hunt-Goring. "You're absolutely at my mercy, and it's very poor policy on your part not to recognize that fact. Just listen. You want me to let you go, you say. Well, I will let you go, for one small consideration on your part. You've never paid that debt of yours. You will pay it now. In full, freely, both arms around my neck. Come, I've a right to ask that much. It's just a whim that you can't refuse to gratify." "I can refuse." The words leaped from Olga. Her strength was returning, her heart quickening with every instant. "At least you can't make me do that," she said. "You would rather do it than marry me, I presume," he said. "I will never do either." She stirred at last in his hold. She did not shrink from his eyes any longer. Rather she challenged them as she stiffened herself to rise. Hunt-Goring laughed in her face. "Oh, won't you?" he said. "I fancy you said that once before, and lived to regret it. It really is not wise of you to defy me. I warn you. I warn you." His hold tightened upon her with sudden brutality, quelling her effort at freedom. "There are worse things than marriage," he said. "Are you utterly ignorant, I wonder, or deliberately foolhardy? Why do you always force upon me the role of villain? I tell you again, you are not wise." "I don't know what you mean," Olga said. She sat quite still in his hold now, for she knew that resistance was useless. Like Noel, she suddenly wondered if he were indeed sane. His eyes were unlike any she had ever seen in a human being. They glared upon her so devilishly, so murderously. She faced them with all her courage. "I don't know what you mean," she repeated. "I think you must be mad to persecute me in this way. I have always said that I would never marry you." "But you will change your mind," he said. She kept her eyes on his. "I shall never change my mind," she said very distinctly. He laughed again, his lower lip between his teeth. "Even if I were mad," he said, "wouldn't you be wiser to humor me? Have you forgotten what happened when you flouted me before?" "No, I have not forgotten." A quiver of anger went through Olga, and she suffered it, for it helped her courage. "I shall never forgive you for that," she said. "Never, as long as I live." Hunt-Goring continued to laugh, and his laugh was an insult. "I shall get over that," he told her. "I don't want your forgiveness, especially as you had yourself alone to thank for that episode. But come now. About marrying me. You'd better give in at once. You'll have to in the end. And there are plenty of advantages to outweigh your present disinclination. For instance, my life is not considered a good one. As my widow you would be quite a wealthy woman. Doesn't that appeal to you? And I'll give you plenty of rope even while I'm alive. I shan't interfere with your pleasures. Come, I shouldn't make such a bad husband. I'm quite respectable nowadays. I should want a little attention, of course, but you wouldn't find me exacting. You'll get quite fond of me in time." Olga barely repressed a shudder. "Never," she said. "No, never." "Never," said Hunt-Goring. He stooped a little lower over her, his arm about her shoulders despite her sick disgust. "Why never? You've sent that doctor chap about his business, haven't you?" "He has gone, yes." She answered him briefly to hide the intolerable pain at her heart the words called up. "But you're still hankering after him. Is that it?" sneered Hunt-Goring. "Well, then, listen to me. I hold that man's future in my hands. I can ruin him utterly, or I can forbear. I'm not over fond of him, as you know. I should rather like to see him ruined, though it would give me some little trouble to do it. What say you? I am the gladiator in the arena. I shall slay or spare, at your word alone." Again his eyes overwhelmed her, so that she could not meet them. A great shiver went through her. She began to pant a little. "I don't understand," she said. "You know nothing but gossip. You can prove nothing." "Can I not?" said Hunt-Goring. "You haven't a very high opinion of my intelligence, have you? Colonel Campion, I believe you know him, is scarcely the man to sit still when such gossip as that reaches his ears. As for the proofs, I know how to find them. The worthy Mrs. Briggs was on the spot, you may remember. Her evidence would be valuable. And there are other well-known means which I needn't go into now. But I assure you the circumstances themselves, properly handled, are sufficiently suspicious. You would not care to see your friend Max on his trial for murder, I presume?" She shivered again, shivered from head to foot. She did not utter a word. "No, I thought not," said Hunt-Goring after a moment. "It would be especially painful for you, as your evidence also would be required. You see the position quite clearly, don't you? Come, hadn't you better give in now, and save further trouble?" She was silent still. Only her breath came fast, as the breath of one who nears exhaustion. Hunt-Goring waited a little, watching her white face. "Come," he said. "I don't want to play the villain any longer. Can't you give me something better to do? I always dance to your piping." She spoke at last, forcing her trembling lips to utterance, after repeated effort. "Go, please," she said. "Go?" said Hunt-Goring. "Yes, go." She raised her eyes for an instant, piteously entreating, to his. "I can't talk to you now. Can't think even. I will see you again later." "When?" he said. Her breast was rising and falling. She could not for several seconds answer him. Then, "At the ball on Thursday," she whispered. "You will give me my answer, then?" he said. "Yes." He smiled, a cruel smile. "After due consultation with Nick, I suppose. No, my dear. I think not. We'll keep this thing a secret for the present, and I'll have my answer now." "I can't answer you now." She flung the words wildly and rose up between his hands with desperate strength. "I can't, I can't," she cried. "You must give me a little time. I shan't consult Nick or anyone. I only want to think by myself." "Really?" said Hunt-Goring. "Yes, really." She set her hands against his breast, holding him from her, yet beseeching him. "Oh, you can't refuse me this," she urged. "It's too small a thing. I've got to find out if I can possibly do it." "You won't run away?" he said. "No, no. I've nowhere to go." "And you mention the matter to no one? On your oath? Till we meet again?" His eyes were cruel still, but they were not cold. They shone upon her with a fierce heat. She could not avoid them, though they seemed to burn her through and through. "I promise," she said through white lips. "Very well. Till Thursday, then." He let her go, and then, as if repenting, caught her suddenly back to him, savagely, passionately. "I'll have that kiss anyway," he said, "whether you take me or not. It's the price of my good behaviour till Thursday. Come, a kiss never hurt anyone, so it isn't likely to kill you." She did not resist him. She even gave him her lips. But she was shaking as one in ague, and her whole weight was upon him as he crushed her in his arms. So deathly was her face that after a moment even he was slightly alarmed. He put her down again in the chair with a laugh that was not wholly self-complacent. "That's all right, then. I'll leave you to get used to the idea. You will give me my answer on Thursday, then, and we will decide on the next step. I don't mean to be kept waiting, you know. I've had enough of that." She did not answer him or move. She was staring straight before her, with hands fast gripped together in her lap. He bent a little. "What's the matter? I haven't hurt you. Aren't you well?" "Quite," she said without stirring. He laughed again, the soft laugh she so abhorred. "Jove, what a dance you've led me," he said. "You'll have a good deal to make up for when the time comes. I shan't let you off that." "Will you, please, go?" said Olga in that still voice of hers, not looking at him yet, nor moving. He laughed again, caressingly. "Yes, I'll go. You want to have a good quiet think, I suppose. But there's only one way out, you know. You'll have to give in now. And the sooner the better." "I shall see you on Thursday," she said. "Yes, I shall be there. Keep the supper dances for me. We'll find a quiet corner somewhere and enjoy ourselves. Till Thursday, then. Good-bye." "Good-bye," she said. He was gone. Before her wide eyes he went away along the veranda, and passed from her sight, and there fell an intense silence. Olga sat motionless as a statue, gazing straight before her. A squirrel skipped airily on to the further end of the veranda and sat there, washing its face. Below, on the path, a large lizard flicked out from behind a stone, looked hither and thither, spied the still figure, and darted away again. And then, somewhere away among the cypresses, the silence was broken. A paroquet began to screech. Olga stirred, and a great breath burst suddenly from her, the first she had drawn in many seconds. She stretched out her hands into emptiness. "Oh, Max," she said. "Max, Max." With that bitter cry, all her strength seemed to go from her. She bowed her head upon her knees and wept bitterly, despairingly. It must have been a full quarter of an hour later that Nick came lightly along the veranda, paused an instant behind the bowed figure, then slipped round and knelt beside it. "Kitty, Kitty, what's the matter?" he said. His one arm gathered her to him so that she lay against his shoulder in the old childish attitude, his cheek pressed against her forehead. She was too exhausted, too spent by that bitter paroxysm of weeping to be startled by his sudden coming. She only clung to him weakly, whispering, "Oh, Nick, have you come back at last?" "But of course I have," he said. "Have you been worrying about me? I sent you a message." "I know, but I couldn't help being anxious." She murmured the words into his neck, her arms tightening about him. "What a silly little sweetheart," he said. "Is that what you've been crying for?" She was silent. He passed rapidly on. "You mustn't cry any more, darling. Old Reggie will be here soon, you know. He'll think I've been bullying you. Have you been sitting here by yourself all the morning? Why didn't you go down to Daisy Musgrave?" "I didn't want to, Nick. I don't mind in the least being by myself," she told him, mastering herself with difficulty. "Tell me what you've been doing all this time." "I?" said Nick. "Watching and listening chiefly. Not much else. Is the post in? Come and help me read my letters." "They're here." Olga turned and began to feel about with one hand under her work. "All right. I'll find 'em." He let her go and fished out his correspondence himself. She was glad that he did not look at her very critically, or press further for the cause of her woe. He sat down on the mat at her feet, and proceeded to read his letters as she handed them to him. After a little she took up her work again. She had quite regained her composure, only she was utterly weary, too weary to feel anything but a numb aching. All violent emotion had passed. Suddenly Nick dropped his correspondence and turned. "Kitty," he said, "I'm going to chuck this job." She looked down at him with a surprise that would have been greater but for her great weariness. "Really, Nick?" "Yes, really. I have done my poor best, but to make a success would be a life job. Moreover," Nick's eyes suddenly gleamed, "the party want me, or say they do. There's going to be a big tug of war this summer, and they want me to help pull. I'm rather good at pulling," here spoke Nick's innate modesty, "and so I've got to be there." "We are going home, then?" Olga's voice was low. She spoke as one whom the decision scarcely touched. Nick leaned back luxuriously against her knees. "Yes, sweetheart, home. Home to Muriel and the kitty. Home to good old Jim. You won't be sorry to see your old dad again?" "No," she said. Then, as his brows went up, she stooped forward and kissed the top of his head. "But you've been very good to me, Nick," she said. I've been happier with you, dear, than I could have been with anyone." "Save one," said Nick, flashing a swift look upwards. "And you've struck him off the list, poor beggar." She checked him quickly, her hand on his shoulder. "Please, Nick," she whispered. He nodded wisely. "Yes, that hurts, doesn't it? But you're not the only one to suffer. Ever think of that?" She did not answer him. With a quiver in her voice, she changed the subject. "When do you think we shall go home, then, Nick?" "Soon," said Nick. "Very soon. They say I can't be spared much longer. Awfully sweet of 'em, isn't it? As for this immoral little state, it ought to be put under the martial law for a spell. It won't be, of course. But old Reggie will understand. He'll take measures, and relieve me of my stewardship as soon as may be. I'm sorry in a way, but I only bargained for 6 months. And I want to get back to Muriel." He turned to her again with his elastic smile. "But you've been a dear little pal. You've kept me from pining," he said. "Wish your affairs might have ended more cheerily. But we won't discuss that. Let's see. You don't know Sir Reginald Bassett, do you?" "No, dear." "Nor Lady Bassett, his wife. Good for you. Pray that you never may, and the odds are in favour of the prayer being granted. She has decided not to come after all." "Not to come, Nick? Why, I thought it was all settled." Nick grinned. "Her heart has failed her at the last moment. She doesn't like immoral states." He waved a letter jubilantly in the air. "No matter, my dear. We shall get on excellently without her. She isn't your sort at all." He broke into a laugh. She's the only woman of my acquaintance I don't love, and the only one, literally, who doesn't love me." "How horrid of her, Nick. I'm sure I should hate her." "I'm sure you would, dear. So it's just as well, all things considered, that you are not going to meet. Well, I must go and get respectable." He rose with a quick, lithe movement, but paused, looking down at her quizzically to ask, "What did you think of my friend the Moonstone seller? Pretty, isn't he?" She smiled for the first time. "I'm sure he's quite disreputable. He disappeared in the most mysterious fashion. I wonder if he's lurking about anywhere still, waiting to murder us in our beds." "I wonder," said Nick. But he did not trouble himself to look round for the mysterious one, nor did the possibility of being murdered seem to disturb him greatly. He went away to his room, humming a love song below his breath. And Olga knew that his thoughts were far away in England, where Muriel was waiting to welcome him home. End of chapter 20. Part 2, chapters 21 and 22 of The Keeper of the Door by Ethel Dell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 21. The Gathering Storm. Looking back in after days, the time that elapsed between the morning of Sir Reginald Bassett and the night of the fancy dress ball at the mess house was to Olga as a whirling nightmare. She took part in all the gaieties that she and Noel had so busily planned, but she went through them as one in the grip of some ghastly dream, beholding through all the festivities the shadow of inexorable fate drawing near. For she was caught in the net at last, hopelessly, irrevocably enmeshed. From the very outset she had realized that. There could no longer be any way of escape for her, for she could not accept deliverance at the price that must be paid for it. She did not so much as seek to escape, knowing her utter helplessness. Rebellion was a thing of the past. Her spirit was broken. Had she been still engaged to Max, the struggle, though hopeless, would have been more fierce. But since that was over, there was little left to fight for on her own account. Hate and loathe the man as she might, she was forced to own his mastery. To pass from the desert to an inferno was not so racking a contrast as if he had dragged her direct from her paradise. Later, when the first paralysis of despair had passed, when her captor came to take full possession, she would rebel again, wildly, madly. There would be a frightful struggle between them, the last fierce effort of her instinct to be free from a bondage that revolted her. Vaguely, from afar, she viewed that inevitable battle, and in her mind the conviction grew that she would not survive it. The thing was too monstrous. It would kill her. But for the present her power of resistance was dead. Max must be protected, and this was the only way. She did not dare to think of him in those days, save as it were in the abstract. He filled a certain chamber in her heart which she never entered. He had gone out of her life more completely than if he had died, for she cherished no tender memory of him. She turned away from the bare thought of him, and in the naked horrors of the night, when she lay cold and staring while the hours crawled by, she deliberately banished him from her mind. She was going to do this thing for his sake, this thing that she firmly believed would kill her, but she barred him away from her agony. Not even in thought could she endure his presence at the sacrifice. So, without struggle, those awful days passed, and she mingled with the gay crowd, instinctively hiding the plague spot in her soul. Each day she encountered Hunt-Goring at one function or another, meeting the gleam in his dark eyes with no outward tremor, but with a heart gone cold. He made no attempt to be alone with her. He was content to bide his time, knowing that the game was his. And each night the memory of his hateful kisses wound like a thread of evil through her brain, banishing all the rest. It was on the afternoon preceding the ball that Nick called her out to the veranda where he and Sir Reginald were sitting. She liked Sir Reginald. He was genial and kindly and exceedingly easy to entertain. He drew forward a chair beside him as she approached. "Come and join us, Miss Ratcliffe. Nick and I have been having a very lengthy confab. I am afraid you will accuse me of monopolizing him." Olga came to the chair and sat beside him. "I hope you have been telling him to stop his visits to the native quarter at night," she said. "They are very bad for him. Look how thin he is getting." Nick laughed, but Sir Reginald shook his head. "If I may be allowed to say so, I don't think you are either of you looking very robust," he said. "India plays tricks with us, doesn't she? It doesn't do to let her get too strong a hold. I think Nick will be in a position to take you home before the end of next month, Miss Ratcliffe. His work here is practically done, and a very brilliant service he has rendered the Government. It has been a very delicate task, and he has accomplished it with marked ability." "Oh, is it finished?" said Olga. "Not finished, no," said Nick, "and never will be with Kobad Shikan in power. But I rather fancy the days of that old gentleman's supremacy are drawing to an end. I've been teaching friend Akbar a thing or two lately. He is beginning to see which way the cat jumps, and to realize that the only way to hold his own is to hold by his masters. I've been the antidote to a big dose of sedition administered by the hoary Kobad, and I fancy I've brought him round. Kobad's influence is undermined in all directions, and I fancy the old sinner is beginning to know it." "I knew he was a horrid old man," said Olga. Nick laughed again. "He entertains a very lively hatred for all of us that nothing will ever eradicate. But he belongs to the old regime, so what could one expect? I have even heard it whispered that he served with the rebel sepoys in the mutiny. However, his day is done. Akbar is no longer under his influence. He will strike out a line for himself now. I've won him round to the British Raj, and if he isn't assassinated by Kobad's people, he'll do. It's a pity they can't have martial law for a bit," he added to Sir Reginald. "They would settle in half the time. Hang a few, shoot a few, and—" "Nick!" said Olga in astonishment. He stretched out his one hand and laid it on her knee. "And flog a few," he finished, smiling at her. "There would be some chance for the state then. Yes, I'm a bloodthirsty creature. Didn't you know? One can't wear gloves for this game." Olga held his hand in silence. She had learned more of Nick in the past 5 months than she had ever known before. Undoubtedly he had become more of the man to her and less of the hero. She did not love him any the less for it, but her attitude towards him was different. She knew he had divined the change, and suspected him of being amused thereby, a suspicion which he strengthened by saying with a laugh, "You didn't know I could be such a brute, did you?" She smiled back a little wistfully. "I begin to think you could be almost anything, Nick," she said. He shot her a swift glance, and it seemed to her for a moment that he was looking for a double meaning to her words. But apparently he found none, for he smiled again with the comfortable remark, "Ah, well, it's a useful faculty if exercised with discretion. What are you going to wear to-night? Let's hear all about it." That was the new Nick all over, displaying the male denseness with which she had never been wont to credit him. She gave him details of her costume without much ardour, he listening with careless comments. "You don't sound very keen," he said suddenly. "I believe you're getting blasé." "These things get a little monotonous, don't they?" said Sir Reginald. His smile was sympathetic. She felt inexplicably that he understood her better than did Nick. He had fathomed the deadly weariness that Nick had overlooked. "Go on," commanded Nick. "Who are you going to dance with?" She hesitated a little, and he turned his hand and pinched her fingers somewhat mercilessly. "Noel, of course. He's too handsome to refuse, isn't he? And the rest of the boys will expect their share, doubtless. But remember, the supper dances are mine." She started a little. "Oh, Nick, dear, I'm afraid I've promised those already." "To whom?" said Nick swiftly. "Major Hunt-Goring." Her voice was low. She did not look at him as she uttered the name. Nick's eyebrows shot upwards with lightning rapidity, then drew into a frown. He was silent for a moment before he said very decidedly, "I'm not going to let you dance with Hunt-Goring, so you may as well pass his dances on to me. If he wants to know the reason, he can ask me, and I shall be delighted to tell him." He spoke in a fighting tone. There was fight in the grip of his hand. Olga noted it, and foresaw trouble. "I'm afraid it's too late now, Nick," she said rather wearily. "I must keep my engagements." Nick turned and sent one of his keen glances over her. "You won't keep this one," he told her. "I am simply not going to allow it. Those supper dances are mine, so make up your mind to that." He spoke with a finality that made protest seem futile. It seemed to Olga that the yellow face had never looked so grim. She made no further effort to withstand him, aware that to do so would entail a battle of wills which could only end in her defeat. Perhaps deep in the heart of her she was even thankful for this brief reprieve. She said nothing, therefore, and Sir Reginald considerately turned the subject by asking Nick what disguise he intended to assume. "I?" said Nick. "I haven't absolutely decided, sir. I've got a fool's dress somewhere that might serve." He turned, releasing Olga's hand to take a screw of paper from a salver with which Cassur at that moment approached him. He glanced at Sir Reginald as he did so, muttered a word of excuse, and deftly opened it. The next instant he crumpled it again in his hand and spoke over his shoulder to the waiting native. "Say I will see the Moonstone before it is sent away." The man departed, and Nick rose. "Afraid I shall have to go to the palace, sir. Olga, you must take care of Sir Reginald in my absence." "What, now, Nick?" Olga looked up in swift surprise. "Yes, now, my child. Good-bye." He stooped and lightly kissed her. "I dare say I shan't be late back. If I am, you must go to the ball without me, and get Sir Reginald to take care of you. I shall turn up sometime, you may be sure." "Important, is it?" asked Sir Reginald. Nick nodded. "I ought to go, sir. Don't wait for me. I shall follow on if I'm late. In any case," he turned to Olga, "I shall be in time for those supper dances." His look flashed over her with a species of quizzical tenderness. "And you are not to give any dances to Hunt-Goring, mind, whatever the bounder says." He was gone. Free, careless, upright, he strode humming along the veranda and swung round the corner out of sight. A brief silence descended upon the two who were left. Olga glanced once or twice at Sir Reginald, whose brows were drawn in deep thought. At length, with a slight hesitation, she spoke, voicing the anxiety that had been growing within her for many days. "Sir Reginald, do you think he is in any danger when he goes to the city?" The old soldier came out of his reverie and met her eyes. He smiled at her, albeit his own were grave. "He is extremely shrewd and capable," he said. "I do not think there is much likelihood of his being taken unawares." "But it is dangerous," Olga insisted. "There is a certain amount of risk, certainly." Gravely he admitted the fact. "But I think you need not be over-anxious," he added with a kindly smile. "Nick is one of those clever people who always manage to win through somehow. They always used to say of him on the frontier that he bore a charmed life. He has a positive genius for wriggling out of tight corners." He wished to reassure her, she saw. But somehow she did not feel reassured. The conviction was growing upon her that Nick was exposing himself to a danger that would have appalled her had she realized it to its fullest extent. She said no more to Sir Reginald, but her heart sank. The clouds were gathering thicker and ever thicker on her horizon. She did not dare to look forward any more. 22. The Reprieve. "I say, you're magnificent," said Noel. His hand closed tightly upon Olga's with the words. He looked her up and down with a free admiration too boyish to be offensive. "You're an absolute darling in that get-up," he told her with enthusiasm. It was impossible to be indignant. Olga tried, and failed. She had not been aware till that moment that she was making a particularly brave show in her 18th-century costume, with her pink satin finery and powdered hair. But there was no mistaking the adulation in the boy's eyes, and even in the midst of her misery she felt a little glow of gratification. He was looking alluringly disreputable in his highwayman's dress, and the dark eyes shone upon her with fascinating audacity as he lifted her hand to his lips. "So you haven't brought Nick with you?" he said, speaking with laughing haste to cut short her half-hearted rebuke. "No, Nick was called away," she said. "He'll come later if he can." "Called away, was he?" Noel paused with her programme in his hand. "Is that what you are looking so worried about?" She tried to laugh. "Yes, I am rather worried about him. I am afraid he is taking big risks." "Little idiot," said Noel, "when he's got you to look after. But what do you mean by risks? Where has he gone?" "I don't know," she said with a shake of the head. "I don't know anything, Noel. He said something about going to see a moonstone, but I think that was only a blind. He can be rather subtle, you know, when he likes." "Confound him," said Noel. "Why doesn't he turn his attention to taking care of you? I've been wanting to have a talk to you for days, but I couldn't work it somehow." Olga held out her hand for her programme. It shook ever so slightly. "I don't think we have anything very important to talk about," she said. "But we have," he said impetuously. "At least I have. Oh, damn! A million apologies. I couldn't help it. Here's that brute Hunt-Goring. You're not going to dance with him? Say you're full up." Hunt-Goring, attired as a Turk, was crossing the room towards them. Olga cast a single glance over her shoulder, and turned to Noel with panic in her eyes. "I've forgotten something," she said in a palpitating whisper. "I must run back to the cloak-room. Wait for me." She was gone with the words, fleeing like a hunted creature, till the gathering crowd hid her from sight. Hunt-Goring smiled, and turned aside. He had no pressing desire for a public meeting. His turn was coming. The very fact of her flight proclaimed it, and he could very well afford to wait. He would make her pay full measure for that same waiting. He passed Noel's scowl with a lazy sneer. The young man would pay also, and that reflection was nectar to his soul. Carelessly he betook himself to the veranda. The dancing did not attract him. So he had told Daisy Musgrave earlier in the day, a remark which she had been swift to take advantage. For her weariness of her guest was very nearly apparent by that time, and it was a relief to be able to relax her duties as hostess for that evening at least. The dancing began to the strains of the regimental band, and soon the motley throng were all gathered in the ballroom. It did not look like an all-British assembly, but the nationality of the laughing voices was quite unmistakable. All talked and laughed as they danced, and the hubbub was considerable. Into it Olga came stealing back, and paused nervously in the doorway to look on. Daisy, dressed as a water nymph, waved her a gay greeting from her husband's shoulder. Olga smiled and waved back, striving to smother away out of sight the sick fear at her heart. Someone touched her shoulder, and she started round almost with a cry. Noel bent to her. "Sorry I made you jump. Look here. There's no one in the anteroom. Come and sit out with me." He offered his arm, and she took it thankfully without a word. They went away together. The anteroom was dimly lighted and comparatively quiet, though the music and laughter and swish of dancing feet were fully audible there. Noel found her a comfortable chair, and seated himself upon the arm thereof. He did not speak at once, but after a little, as Olga sat in silence, he turned and looked down at her. She raised her eyes at once and smiled. "You must think me very foolish," she said. "No, I don't," he rejoined bluntly. "That brute is enough to scare any woman. You hate him, don't you?" There was insistence in his tone, insistence mingled with a touch of anxiety. But Olga did not answer him. "Don't let us talk about him," she said with a shiver she could not repress. Noel's mouth hardened a little. "I'm very sorry," he said. "But we must. He's been circulating a lot of lies about Max." He paused an instant, looking straight down at her, Max is a good chap, you know," he said. "It's up to me to defend him." Olga's face quivered, but she kept her eyes lifted. "You can't," she said, her voice very low. "Can't I, though?" Hotly he threw back the words. "You don't mean to say you believe it?" "I know it is true," she said. "My dear Olga," he began. But she checked him, her hand upon his arm. "Noel," she said, "truly, I can't talk about this. But that story is true, in part at least. Max admitted it himself to me." "Impossible!" ejaculated Noel. Her fingers closed over his sleeve, her hold was beseeching. "I can't argue with you, Noel," she said. "But I know it is true. You see, I was there." He stared at her in stupefaction. "Olga, I can't believe it." "It is true," she said again. "But," Noel began to waver in spite of himself, "if you were there, you must have known all along." Her brows drew into the old lines of perplexity. "You see, I was ill," she said. I didn't remember. I don't remember all the details even now. I only know that it happened. Max told me so, when I asked him." "Good heavens above!" ejaculated Noel. She went on drearily, as if he had not spoken. "That was the end of everything between us. And it's just as well now. For I shouldn't have been able to marry him, even if it hadn't been." "Why not?" said Noel. She looked away from him, and was silent. He leaned down towards her and spoke quickly, urgently. "Olga dear, forgive me for asking, but I must know. Don't you really love him?" She made a little unconscious gesture of the hands as of pushing something from her. "No," she said. "But you did," he insisted. She leaned her elbow on her knee, lodging her chin upon her hand. "I thought I did once," she said slowly. "But it was a mistake." "It couldn't have been," he said. She nodded slowly 2 or 3 times, not turning her head. "Yes," she said, with the air of one clinching an argument. "It was a mistake." Noel was silent for a few moments. There was something in her set profile that hurt him. He longed to see her full face. But she did not move. She seemed almost to have forgotten that he was there. He moved at last, bending nearer. "Olga," he whispered. "Yes." Still she did not turn. He slipped down to his knees beside her. "Olga," he said, again very pleadingly. She stirred then, stirred and looked him full in the eyes. And all his life Noel remembered the awful despair that looked out at him from her soul. "I can't," she said. He clasped her 2 hands between his own. "Can't you even think of it?" he urged under his breath. "You know," he said, "you'd have married me if poor old Max hadn't come first. I wouldn't cut him out for the worlds. But that's happened already, hasn't it? Surely there's no one else?" But Olga made no answer. Only the despair in her eyes deepened to a dumb agony. "Darling," he whispered, gathering her hands up and holding them against his face, "I'd be awfully good to you. And I want you. I do want you. Won't you even consider it?" A great shiver went through Olga. "Won't you have my love?" he said. But still for a little she was silent. It seemed that no words would come. Then, as he pressed his lips to the hands he had taken, something seemed suddenly to break loose within her. With a great sob she leaned her head upon his shoulder. "Noel, Noel, I can't." His arms clasped her in a moment. He held her close. "Dearest, what is it? Why can't you?" She answered him with her face hidden, and in a voice so low that he barely caught the words. "I am not free." "Not free?" Sharply he repeated the phrase. Suspicion, keen edged as a rapier, ran swiftly through him. His arms tightened. Olga, tell me what you mean. Who is it? Not that devil Hunt-Goring." She did not answer him, save by her silence and the convulsive shudder that went through her at his words. But that in itself was answer enough, and over her head Noel swore a deep and terrible oath. Only a few yards away the lilting waltz music was quickening to a finish. In a few moments more their privacy would be invaded by the giddy dancers. "Listen," said Noel, and his voice fell short and stern. "He shan't have you. That I swear. It's monstrous. It's unthinkable. Why, he's old enough to be your father. And he's got the opium habit. Max told me so. Olga, I say, haven't you the strength of mind to refuse him? If the brute pesters you, why don't you tell Nick?" Slowly Olga raised herself, quitting his support. "I've promised not to tell anyone," she said dully. "You mustn't know either." "But, my dear girl, something must be done," he objected. "You can't let him ride over you roughshod. You can't mean to let him marry you?" "I can't help it," she said. "Can't help it?" He stared at her. "He really has some hold over you, then. What is it?" She was silent. The last crashing chords of the first waltz were being played. Noel got to his feet. His boyish face was set in grim lines. "Do you want me to go and kill him?" he said. "No." She sprang up also, quickened to sudden fear by his words. "You're not to go near him," she said. "Noel, promise me you won't. Oh, if you only knew how much harder your interference makes things. Don't you see? I've given him my word to consult no one." She was panting uncontrollably. Her hands were fast closed upon his arm. "I refused him once before," she told him feverishly, "and he punished me cruelly. I daren't refuse him again." "You'd sooner marry him?" Noel stared at her incredulously. She flung out her hands with a wide, despairing gesture. Yes, I would sooner marry him." The music had stopped. There came the sound of approaching voices. Their privacy was at an end. Yet for full 10 seconds Noel stood widely gazing at the girl before him with eyes in which surprise, hurt pride, and smoldering passion mingled. Then very abruptly, as the first chattering couple reached the half-open door, he swung away from her. "All right," he said. "Good-bye." He went straight out without a glance behind, nearly running into the gay invaders. Olga, with the instinct to escape notice, turned as swiftly to the window. She went out upon the veranda, blindly groping her way, scarcely aware of her surroundings. And a figure waiting there in the dimness laughed a cruel laugh, and roughly caught her. "You'd sooner marry him, eh?" jibed a voice close to her ear. "My dear, that's the wisest resolution you ever made in your life." She did not cry out or attempt to resist him. She had known that her fate was sealed. Only, as his lips sought hers, she shrank away with every fibre of her being in sick revolt, and for the first time in her life she begged for mercy. "Please, give me to-night," she pleaded. "Only to-night. Yes, I will marry you. But don't ask any more of me to-night." He paused, still holding her in his arms, feeling the wild beat of her heart against his own, softened in spite of himself by that quivering, agonized appeal. "And if I let you go to-night, what will you give me to-morrow?" he said. "I shall be your fiancée to-morrow," she whispered, gasping. "And you will marry me? When?" "You shall decide," she murmured, faintly. He laughed rather brutally. "A somewhat empty favour, my dear, since I should have decided in any case. But if you give me your promise to come to me like a sensible girl, without any more nonsense of any kind." "I will," she said. "I will." "Then," he released her with the words, "I give you your freedom till to-morrow. Go, and make the most of it." He had not kissed her. She slipped from his arms, thankful for his forbearance, and sped away down the veranda like a shadow. As for Hunt-Goring, he cursed himself for a soft fool, and took out his cigarettes to while away what promised to be an evening of infernal dullness. End of chapters 21 and 22. Part 2, chapters 23 and 24 of The Keeper of the Door by Ethel Dell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 23. The Gift of the Rajah. Olga danced that night with the feeling that she danced upon her grave, reminding herself continually, as the hours slipped by, that it was her last night of freedom. The failure of Nick to appear for the supper dances diverted her thoughts from this, but to send them with ever-growing anxiety into a new channel. Where was Nick? What was happening to him? What could be delaying him? She had no partner to take her into supper, refusing each one that offered with the repeated declaration that she must wait for Nick. But Nick came not, and momentarily her uneasiness increased. Sir Reginald came to her at last, his kindly face full of sympathy. "There is probably no occasion for alarm, my dear," he said. "Come, give me the pleasure of your company at supper." She had to yield, for he would take no refusal. But she could eat nothing, notwithstanding his utmost solicitude. She was in a state of mind to start at every sudden sound, and the food he put before her remained untasted on her plate. Sir Reginald watched over her with fatherly concern, but he could do nothing to alleviate her anxiety. In his own private soul he shared it to a considerable degree. As they left the supper room together, she turned to him piteously. "Oh, do you think I might go back and see if he has returned? Really, I can't dance any more." "Wait a little longer," he counseled. "You needn't dance, of course. Stay quietly with me. He may walk in at any moment." She longed to go, but could not refuse a suggestion so kindly offered. She stayed with him, therefore, glad of his protecting presence, refusing to dance any more on the plea of fatigue. The whirling scene wearied her unspeakably. She found herself watching Noel, who was frankly flirting with every woman in the room. It was doubtless a safe pastime, but behind her gnawing anxiety a little spark of resentment kindled and burned. How hopelessly fickle he was! Hunt-Goring had apparently removed himself from the gay company altogether, for she saw him not at all. His absence was the only palliating circumstance in that hour of sick suspense. It was growing late, and the remaining dances were few, when a native orderly entered the room and stepped up to Colonel Bradlaugh, who was standing with Sir Reginald. He murmured a few low words, to which the Colonel listened with a frown. It was his habit to frown always at the unexpected. He turned after a moment to Sir Reginald. "There's a messenger arrived from the palace with a box of sweets or something." "What?" breaking off ferociously as the orderly's lips moved soundlessly. "Moonstones, Sahib," murmured the orderly with deference. "Moonstones!" repeated the Colonel in a tone of vast contempt. "To be presented to the lady wearing the best make-up in the room! What on earth am I to do, sir?" "Accept with thanks, I should say," said Sir Reginald with a smile. "Oh, I don't mean that," said the Colonel, frowning still more. "But who the dickens is going to decide as to the merits of the ladies' costumes? Not I, and not my wife. It's too big a responsibility, that." Sir Reginald laughed. "That is a serious consideration, certainly. I should make them decide themselves. Vote by ballot. That ought to satisfy everyone." The Colonel turned to the waiting orderly. "Very well. Tell the messenger to come in." He made a sign to Noel, who had just ceased to dance, that brought the young man to his side. "Look here, Wyndham. You organized this show, so you may as well take on this job. The Rajah has sent a prize for the lady wearing the best costume." Noel frowned also at the news. "Confound him! What for, sir?" "Oh, I suppose he wants to make himself popular," said the Colonel, still mightily contemptuous. "We can't refuse it, anyway. Arrange for the ladies to vote by ballot, will you? They will probably all vote for themselves," he added to Sir Reginald. "But that's a detail. And I say, Noel, get a table from somewhere, will you? It's your show, not mine." Noel smiled upon his commanding officer, an impudent, affectionate smile. He and Badgers were close allies. "Very good, sir. I'll see to it," he said, and departed. Under his directions a table was brought in and placed at the end of the room. The dancing was stopped temporarily, and the dancers lined up against the walls. Noel, armed with a sheaf of notepaper, went the round, tearing off slips and distributing them as he went. While this was in progress, the Rajah's messenger was admitted and conducted to the table behind which stood Sir Reginald with Olga and Colonel Bradlaugh. He was a very magnificent person, turbaned and glittering. He bore himself like the servant of an emperor. In his hands he carried with extreme care an ivory casket, exquisitely carved, with a lock of wrought Indian gold. The key, also of gold, lay on the top of the casket. The gift was plainly a costly one, and every eye in the room followed it. The messenger reached the table and bowed low. "With the compliments of His Highness, the Rajah of Sharapura," he said, and deposited the casket upon the table. The colonel glanced at Sir Reginald, who at once responded. "Convey our thanks to the Rajah," he said, "and say that the gracious gift will be much appreciated. I shall give myself the pleasure of calling upon him to assure him of this in person to-morrow." The messenger salaamed again deeply and withdrew. "I wish he'd keep his precious moonstones," grumbled the colonel. "They are more bother than they're worth. Hurry up there, Noel. It's getting late." "Just finished, sir," came Noel's cheery answer. "I must just get a hat to hold the ballot papers." He did not offer a paper to Olga, who still kept her place by Sir Reginald, her young face white and tired under the pile of fair, powdered hair. "I think I shall go when this is over," she whispered to Sir Reginald. "So you shall," he said kindly. "I will escort you myself. I expect we shall find Nick waiting for us," he added with a smile. "Some business has delayed him, I have no doubt." She tried to smile in answer, but her lips quivered in spite of her. She turned her face aside, ashamed of her weakness. Noel came up with the ballot papers, and emptied them out upon the table without a glance at her. "I must get you to help," said Sir Reginald, drawing her gently forward. "I can manage, sir," said Noel shortly. But the colonel broke in. "Nonsense, Wyndham. One scrutineer isn't enough." And Noel pushed across a handful of papers to Olga without lifting his eyes. With fingers that trembled slightly she began to sort, assisted by Sir Reginald. Several of the papers bore her own name, a fact which at first she scarcely noticed, but which very soon became too conspicuous to be ignored. "I believe it's yours," murmured Sir Reginald at her elbow. "Oh, impossible," she said, blushing. But in a very few minutes the suspicion was verified. Noel looked up from his sorting with a brief, "You've won?" Olga raised her eyes swiftly, but he instantly averted his, and turned to communicate the result to the colonel. The latter shook hands with her and shouted the news in his loudest parade voice to the assembled company. There ensued applause and congratulations that Olga would gladly have foregone. Then, as her friends began to press round, Sir Reginald stepped forward. "It is my proud privilege," he said, "to present to Miss Ratcliffe, in the Rajah's name, his very handsome gift." He took the golden key from the top of the casket and handed it with a bow to Olga. She took it, with a murmur of thanks, and stood hesitating, possessed by a very curious feeling of dread. "Open it," said Noel impatiently. "Open it for her," said Sir Reginald, divining a certain amount of nervousness as the cause of her hesitation. Noel held out a hand for the key, and she gave it to him. There was a sudden hush, and a little thrill of expectation in the motley crowd gathered round, as he turned to fit it into the lock. The key did not fit in very easily. It seemed to meet with some obstruction. With a frown Noel pulled it out again. "What's the matter with the thing?" he said irritably. "Try it the other way up," suggested Sir Reginald. "I believe it's a hoax," said a man in the crowd. Noel turned the key upside down amid an interested silence, and began to insert it again in the lock. As he did so there came a sudden cry from the background, a man's voice, shrill and warning. "Leave the thing alone! It's a bomb! I tell you it's a bomb!" "What?" The crowd scattered backwards as though a thunderbolt had fallen in its midst, and a woman shrieked in panic. A man, wild, unkempt, ragged, tore like a maniac over the polished floor, making for the group at the table, waving one skinny arm. "Noel, you damned fool, leave the thing alone!" Noel whizzed round with the key in his hand. "Hello? Nick?" he said. "Leave it alone! Leave it alone!" The voice dropped to a hoarse croak. The man was close to the table now, and in amazement Olga recognized the face of the old Moonstone seller. But it was convulsed with a terror such as she had never seen on the face of any man. The bony hand darted out towards the casket, and her heart stood still. She knew that hand. Wiry, energetic, capable. "Nick," she whispered. "Nick." He brushed her aside, and again in that dry, breathless croak. "There isn't a moment to lose," he said. In another instant he would have had the shining thing in his grasp, but in that instant Noel's wits leaped to full understanding. He wheeled, caught the newcomer by his tattered garment, and flung him violently away. "All right, you old joker," he said. "My job." Dazed with horror, though still scarcely realizing, Olga saw him turn and lift the ivory casket, holding it clasped firmly between his hands. Then, with a set face, stepping warily, he moved to the window close behind. In the other part of the room women were crying, and men deeply cursing. But there near the table no one uttered a sound, till the ragged creature on the floor sprang up, crying hoarsely for a pail of water. Noel's figure passed through the open window as he did so, smoothly, unfalteringly, and so out upon the dark veranda. Deftly, warily, he made his way. The thing between his hands weighed heavily. It would have been no job for a one-armed man. He passed down the veranda with every nerve strung to the moment's emergency. Unquestionably he was not afraid, but he could have wished that the place had been better illuminated. His progress would have been considerably quicker. He neared the flight of 6 steps that led down to the compound, and suddenly became aware of a dark figure lounging in a wicker chair ahead of him. He saw the glow of a cigarette. He raised his voice. "Hi, you! Clear out! Git, if you value your life. There's going to be an explosion." He did not slacken his pace as he uttered his warning. He dared not pause. His whole heart was set on reaching the compound in time. The figure in the chair turned towards him. He heard the creak of the bamboo, but it made no movement to rise. "Confound you! Take your chance, then," said Noel between his teeth. He came closer. He saw in a momentary glance the face behind the cigarette. Heavy, drugged eyes looked up to his. Then in the dimness he heard a sudden movement, a snarling, devilish laugh. The next instant he kicked against an obstruction, staggered, fought madly to recover himself, tripped a second time, and with a yell of rage fell headlong. There came a flash of blinding, intolerable brightness, a roar as of the roar of a cannon, stunning, deafening, devastating, the smaller sound of wood splintering and falling. And then a dumb and awful silence more fearful than death. The first to arrive on that scene of darkness and destruction was the old Moonstone seller. He seemed to be gifted with eyes of extraordinary keenness, for he made his way unerringly, with the agility of a monkey, among the splintered debris. One corner of the mess house had completely gone, leaving a gaping hole into the ante-room. Dimly the lamps within shone upon the wreckage. The crowd from the ballroom, horror-stricken, fearful, were gathered about the doorway. The atmosphere was thick with dust and smoke. Light as an acrobat, the Moonstone seller stepped among the ruins, then paused to listen. "Is there anyone here?" he asked aloud. "Noel, are you here?" There was no answer. The awful, tragic silence closed in upon his words. But it did not daunt him. Cautiously he crept a little further forward. And now there came a voice from the room behind him, Colonel Bradlaugh's voice, harsh with suspense. "Is the boy dead? "Don't know yet, sir," came back the answer. "Will you send a lantern? Ah, hello!" Something had moved against his foot. Something writhed and groaned. The searcher stooped. "Hello!" he said again. "Noel, is it you, lad? I'm here. I'll help you." A voice answered him, a smothered, inarticulate voice. A groping hand came up, clutching for deliverance. There came the slip and crackle of broken wood beneath which some living object struggled and fought for freedom. The one wiry arm of the Moonstone seller went down to the rescue. It did good service that night, such service as astonished even its owner when he had time to think. The man under the debris was making titanic efforts, thrusting his way upwards with desperate, frantic strength. Once as he strove he uttered a sharp, agonized cry, and the man above him swore in fierce, instinctive sympathy. "Where are you hurt, old chap? Keep your head, for heaven's sake. Where is it worst?" The gasping voice made answer with spasmodic effort. "My head, my face, my eyes. Oh, God, my eyes!" There followed a cough as if something choked all utterance, and then again that mute, gigantic struggle for freedom. It was over at last. Out of the wreckage there staggered the dreadful likeness of a man. The lantern had been brought and shone full upon the ghastly sight. He was torn, battered, half naked, and the whole of his face was blackened and streaming with blood. "Noel! Is it Noel?" asked Colonel Bradlaugh. And the man himself made answer, spitting forth the blood that impeded his utterance. "Yes, it's me. But I'm done, sir. I'm done. Bring a light, someone. I can't see where I'm going." The Moonstone seller's arm was round him, holding him up. "All right, lad. I've got you," he said. "But bring a light. Bring a light." A note of panic ran through the reiterated words. "Confound it. I must see. I will see. "My dear lad, you can't see for a minute." It was Nick's voice, quick and soothing. "This infernal blood has got into your eyes. Come and have them attended to. You'll be better directly." "No, it's not the blood. It's not the blood." The words stumbled over each other, well nigh incoherent in their fevered utterance. And suddenly Noel flung up his arms above his head with a wild and anguished cry. "My God! I'm blind! I'm blind!" With the cry his strength, that fiery strength born of emergency, collapsed quite suddenly. His knees doubled under him. He fell forward in utter, overwhelming impotence, and lay prone and senseless at the Colonel's feet. 24. The Big, Big Game of Life. It was many hours later that understanding returned to Noel. He came to himself abruptly, in utter darkness, with the horror of it still strong within his soul. His head was swathed in bandages. He turned it to and fro with restless jerks. "And will you please to lie quiet?" said the voice of the Irish regimental surgeon peremptorily by his side. Noel, also Irish, collected his forces and made reply. "No. Why the devil should I? Where am I? What's going to happen to me? Am I blind for life?" The falter in the words spoke to the tenseness of his suspense. The doctor answered instantly with more of kindliness than judgment. "Faith, no. It's not so bad as that. But you'll have to pretend ye are for the present, or egad, ye will be before you've done. We brought ye to the Musgrave shanty. Mrs. Musgrave wanted the care of ye. Damn quare taste on her part, I'm thinking. And now you're not to talk any more, but drink this stuff like a good boy and go to sleep." Noel drank with disgust. The taste of blood was still in his mouth. He had never been ill in his life before, and he had not the smallest intention of obeying the doctor's orders. "Let's hear what happened," he said impatiently. "Oh, leave me alone, do. When can I have this beastly bandage off my eyes?" "Not for a very long while, my son." The doctor's voice was jaunty, but the eyes that looked at the blind, swathed face were full of pity. "And don't ye go loosening it when my back's turned, or it isn't meself that'll be answerable for the consequences." "Oh, damn the consequences," said Noel. "I want to get up." "And that you can't?" was the doctor's prompt rejoinder. "You'll just lie quiet till further orders. You'll find yourself as weak as a rat, moreover, when you start to move about. It's only the fever in your veins that makes you want to try." Noel straightened himself in the bed. He was becoming aware of a fiery, throbbing torture beneath the bandages. With clenched teeth and hands hard gripped, he set himself to endure. But in a few minutes he turned his head again. "Are you still there, Maloney?" "Still here, my son," said Maloney. "Well, go and find someone, anyone who knows, to tell me exactly what happened last night." "I can tell you meself," began Maloney. But Noel interrupted. "No, not you. You're such a liar. No offence meant. You can't help it. Find Nick, will you?" "It isn't visitors you ought to be having with your pulse in this state," objected Maloney. "Do as I say," commanded Noel, stubbornly. His will prevailed. The Irish doctor saw the futility of argument, and departed, having extracted a promise from his patient not to move during his absence. And then came silence as well as darkness, an awful sense of being entombed, an isolation that appalled him, added to the torture that racked. With an acuteness of consciousness more harrowing than delirium, he faced this thing that had come upon him, grabbing all his courage to endure the ordeal. He felt as if his brain were on fire, each nerve center agonizing separately in the intolerable, all-enveloping flames. And through the dreadful stillness he heard the beat, beat, beat of his heart, like the feet of a runaway along a desert road. He turned his head again restlessly from side to side. The agony was beginning to master him. His powers of endurance were dwindling. Suddenly he found himself speaking, scarcely knowing what he said, feeling that he must cry out or die. "Lighten our darkness, we beseech thee, O God." Just the one sentence over and over to save him from raving insanity. "Lighten our darkness, lighten our darkness, lighten our darkness, we beseech thee." He broke off abruptly. What was the good? Prayers were for white-souled children like Peggy. Was it likely that any cry of his would pierce the veil? Yet the words came back to him, so urgent was his distress, so unbearable the silence of his desert. He said them again with a desperate earnestness, and almost instinctively began to listen for an answer. He felt almost a child again himself in his utter need, as he wrestled to drive the awful darkness from his soul. But no answer came to his cry, and the brave heart of him slowly sank. He was deserted then, hurled down into hell to die a living death. In a single flashing second he had been torn from the world he loved, that bright gay world in which he had revelled all his life, and flung into this inferno of endless darkness. The iron began to bite into his soul. The glory of his youth was quenched. From thenceforth he would hear the music from afar, he would be barred out from the splendor of life, he would wander along the outside edge of things, forlorn and lonely. His popularity, his brilliance, his joy of living, had all been crushed to atoms with that single sledge-hammer blow of fate. Better, 10,000 times better, to have killed him outright, for this thing was infinitely worse than death. The iron drove in a little deeper. His spirit, his pride, awoke and rebelled, raging impotently. He would not bear the burden. He would die somehow. He would find a means, do what they would to stop him. He would escape, somehow, from this particular hell. He would not be chained between life and death. He would burst the bonds. He would be free. His pulses rose to fever pitch. He started up upon the bed. Now was the time, now. He might not have another chance. And there must be some means to his hand, some way out of this awful darkness. The madness of fever urged him. In another moment he would have been on his feet, at grips with the fate that bound him, but even as he gathered himself together for the effort, something happened. The door opened, and a woman entered. He heard the swish of her draperies, and his heart gave a great throb and paused. "Who is it?" he said. and his voice was harsh and dry even to his own hearing. "Who is it? Speak to me." She spoke, and his heart, released from the sudden check, leaped on at a pace that nearly suffocated him. "It's I, Noel. Olga. They said I might come and see you. You don't mind?" "Mind?" he said, and suddenly a great sob burst from him. He felt out towards her with hands that wildly groped. "Let me feel you," he entreated. I'll let you go again." And then very suddenly her arms were all around him, closing him in, lifting him out of his hell. "Noel, my own Noel," she whispered. "My own splendid boy." He held her fast, his battered head pillowed against her while he fought for self-control. For many seconds he could not utter a word. And in the silence the world he knew opened its gates to him again, and took him back. The darkness remained, indeed, but it had been lightened. The horror of it no longer tore his soul. The iron had been withdrawn. He moved at last, drawing her hand to his lips. "Olga, you don't know what you've saved me from. I was in hell." "Lie down, dear," she murmured softly. "I am going to take care of you now." She added as she shook up the pillow, "It's my business, isn't it?" He sank back with a sense of great comfort, holding her hand fast in his. It made the darkness less dark to hold her so. "I want to know what happened," he said. "Sit down and tell me." "And you will try to keep quiet?" she urged gently. "Yes, yes. But don't keep anything back. Tell me everything." "I will, dear," she said, "though really there isn't much to tell. Is that quite comfy? You're not in bad pain?" "I can bear it," he said. "Go on. Let's hear." So, sitting by his side, her hand in his, Olga told him. The plot had been of Kobad Chikan's devising. Nick had been on the watch for it for some time, had penetrated the city nightly in the garb of a moonstone seller, collecting evidence, and, most masterly stroke of all, he had drawn the Rajah into partnership with him. It was due to Nick's influence alone that the Rajah had not been caught in Kobad Chikan's toils. Thanks to Nick's steady call upon his loyalty, he had remained staunch. But Kobad Chikan had been too powerful a tactician to overthrow openly. They had been forced to work against him in secret. "The Rajah calls Nick his brother," said Olga. "Like his cheek," said Noel. "Not that I can talk myself. I took the liberty of kicking him off his own premises once." He chuckled involuntarily at the recollection, and commanded her to continue. So Olga went on to tell of old Kobad's final coup, and of how the Rajah, receiving news of some mischief afoot, had sent an urgent message of warning that had taken Nick straight to the palace. Thence he had gone in disguise to the haunts of Kobad Chikan's conspirators, but here he had received a check. Kobad Chikan, fearing treachery among his followers, had taken elaborate precautions to conceal his proceedings, and for hours Nick had been kept searching vainly for a clue. Then at last he had succeeded in running the truth to earth, had discovered the whole ghastly plot barely half an hour before the time fixed for its consummation, and had raced to the mess house with his warning. "And that's all, is it?" said Noel. "Yes, that's all. Except that old Kobad has disappeared. Nick seems sorry, but everyone else is glad." "And what about Hunt-Goring?" said Noel at last. Olga's fingers tightened in his hold. "Oh, did you know he was there?" she said. Briefly he made answer. "Yes, he tripped me. I believe he was half drunk with opium or something. What happened? Was he killed?" Noel's voice was imperious. She answered him instantly, seeing he demanded it. "Yes." Noel drew a deep breath. "Thank God for that," he said. "Then you are free?" Olga was silent. "You are free?" he repeated, with quick interrogation. Yet an instant longer she hesitated. Then she leaned her head against his pillow with a little sob. "No, I'm not free, Noel. I have given myself to you." "Because I'm blind?" he said. "No, dear, no. Once free, I should have come to you, in any case." "Would you?" he said. "Would you? You are quite sure? You're not saying it out of pity?" "I won't have you marry me out of pity, Olga. I couldn't stand it." "Oh, you needn't be afraid of that," she said. Then a moment later, "When I marry you," she murmured softly, "it will be for love." There was no mistaking the sincerity of the words, though even then, as it were, in spite of himself, he knew that the passionate adoration he had poured out to her had awakened no answering rapture in her heart. The very fashion of her surrender told him this. He might come first with her indeed, but the full gift was no longer hers to offer. "I wonder if you will be happy with me," he said after a moment. "It is my only chance of happiness," she made answer. "How do you know?" There was curiosity in his voice. He made a movement of impatient impotence, putting a hand that trembled up to his bandaged head. She took the hand and drew it softly down. "I will tell you how I know," she said. "I know because when I thought you were killed, I felt as if the world had stopped. And since then, since I knew that you would live, I have been able to think of only you. Only you." Her voice broke upon a sound of tears. "That awful fear for you opened my eyes," she whispered. "I haven't been able to think of Major Hunt-Goring's death, or anything else at all. I've even deserted Nick." Valiantly through her tears she smiled. "I never did such a thing as that before for anyone." He clasped her hands tightly as he lay. "Don't cry, sweetheart," he whispered. "You're not crying for me?" "I can't help it," she whispered back. "I can't bear to think of you suffering. You, Noel, you." "Don't cry," he said again, and this time there was a hint of grimness in his voice. "I shall win through, somehow, for your sweet sake. Maloney told me I wasn't blind just now. That I know was a lie. Or at least he didn't believe it himself. Personally, I feel as if my eyes had been blown clean out of my head. But, blind or otherwise, I'll stick to it. I'll stick to it, Olga. I'll make you happy, so help me God." "My dearest," she murmured. "My dearest." "And you're not to cry over me," he said despotically. "You're not to fret, ever. If you do, I shall be furious." He uttered a quivering laugh. "We'll play the game, dear, shall we? The big, big game of life. It won't be easy, God knows. But he lightened my darkness, very first time of asking, too. So perhaps he'll give us a tip now and then as to the moves." He fell silent for a space, and she wondered if he were growing drowsy. Then, as she sat motionless by his side, closely watching him, she saw the boyish lips part in their own sunny smile. "Go and tell Mrs. Musgrave to hoist a flag," he said. "Say it's the luckiest day of my life." The lips quivered a little over the words, but they continued bravely to smile. And Olga understood. The boy had shouldered his burden with all his soldier's spirit, and nothing would daunt him now. He had begun to play the game. She herself rose to the occasion with instant resolution, forcing back the tears he would not suffer, brave because he was brave. "I shall tell her to hoist one for us both," she said, "and to keep it flying as long as we are under her roof." End of chapters 23 and 24. Part 2, chapters 25 and 26 of The Keeper of the Door by Ethel Dell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 25. Memories that Hurt. "Well, Max, you're just off, then?" Sir Kersley Whitton looked up with a smile to greet his partner as he entered. "Just off," said Max. He came to Sir Kersley seated at his writing table, and paused beside him. It was a day in April, showery, shot with fleeting gleams of sunshine that sent long golden shafts across the doctor's room. "You will bring the boy here, then?" said Sir Kersley. "Yes, straight here. It's very good of you, Kersley. Max's hand lay for a moment on the great man's shoulder. "Nonsense, my dear fellow. I'm as keen as you are." Sir Kersley leaned back in his chair. "I only hope we may be successful," he said. "Is he likely to be a good patient?" "Quite the reverse, I should say." Max sounded grim. "But I expect I can manage him." Sir Kersley smiled again. "Just as you managed me a couple of years ago, eh? Yes, I should say you will be fully competent in that respect. You have a way with you, eh, Max? What was it this Indian doctor said? He believed a cure possible, but only under the most favourable conditions. The boy was in no state then to undergo an operation, and he funked the job." Max's tone was contemptuous. "Ah, well, it's as well he didn't attempt it, in that case," said Sir Kersley. "He will stand a better chance with us. And what about Captain Ratcliffe and Olga? Will they go straight home?" "No," said Max. He paused a moment, then said rather shortly, "I had a line from Dr. Jim. He says she won't leave Noel. He and Mrs. Ratcliffe are coming up to meet them, but he expects to go back alone." "Captain and Mrs. Ratcliffe will stay in town with Olga, then?" asked Sir Kersley. "I believe so." Sir Kersley's grey eyes regarded him thoughtfully. "And she is still in the dark with regard to Miss Campion's death?" he asked after a moment. Max's eyes came swiftly downwards, meeting his look with something of the effect of a challenge. "Yes, absolutely," he said. "It's an extraordinary case," observed Sir Kersley. Max said nothing whatever. He took his pipe from his pocket, and began to fill it with a face of sardonic composure. "I wonder if she ever asks herself how it came about," said Sir Kersley. "Why should she?" said Max gruffly. "My dear fellow, she must have wondered how it happened, why all details were kept from her, and so on." "Why should she?" said Max again aggressively. "The subject is a painful one. She is willing enough to avoid it. Of course," he paused momentarily, "Noel doesn't know about that affair either. No one knows besides ourselves but Dr. Jim and Nick." "In my opinion Noel ought to know," said Sir Kersley with quiet decision. "It would be a terrible thing for Olga if some day, after they were married, she remembered and he were in ignorance of it." Again Max's hand pressed his friend's shoulder, but this time the pressure was one of warning. "Kersley," he said, "I've been into all that. I've weighed every possible contingency that might arise, and I have decided against telling Noel. As you say, it would be a terrible thing if she ever remembered; but if Noel is left in ignorance the chances are she never will remember. To tell him would be to put a shadow between them which he would never forget, and she would in time come to be aware of. It would wreck their happiness sooner or later. No. In heaven's name, leave them in peace." "I think you are wrong," Sir Kersley said. He was looking straight up into Max's face with eyes of shrewd kindliness. "I think it extremely improbable that she will never remember. And I think, moreover, that it is hardly to be desired that she should not." "I disagree with you," said Max harshly. "Yes, my dear fellow, I know you do. You are no impartial judge. You want, very naturally, to save her from any suffering. But I don't think you will succeed. If you could have persuaded her to marry you, you might have done it. Forewarned is forearmed. You would have known how to safeguard her. But utter ignorance is no safeguard at all. I don't think she would thank you for it, if she knew." Max's mouth twisted in its most cynical smile. "I wonder," he said. Sir Kersley said no more. Beyond the bare fact of his brief engagement and its rupture, Max had confided in him not at all. He had left him to infer that she had been caught by a nearer attraction in his absence, an inference which her present engagement to his brother had seemed to confirm. And Sir Kersley had been far too considerate to probe for further enlightenment. But he was not privately by any means satisfied with regard to the matter of Max's long and fruitless journey. He was not accustomed to seeing Max beaten, and the spectacle hurt him. He urged his opinion no further, for it was evident that Max was firmly determined to withstand it. But when Max had gone he sat and contemplated the matter with a troubled frown. There seemed to be something he had not fathomed behind Max's silence. As for Max, he departed from the docks with that air of grimness that had somewhat grown on him of late. Though bound upon a welcoming errand, he knew that it was not going to be a particularly easy one. He was somewhat late in arriving, and the great steamer had already come to her moorings. Among the waiting crowd he discerned Dr. Jim and Muriel, but he did not make his way to them. He knew they would meet later, and he was not feeling sociable that afternoon. So he stood aloof and waited, searching the many faces that lined the deck rails for the one face that alone he longed to see. He spied her at last, and was conscious of a momentary pang that he fiercely stifled. She was standing there at the rail above him, waving her handkerchief to Dr. Jim. Nick was on one side of her, also madly waving and yelling with futile energy. On the other side stood Noel. And at sight of him, Max's grim face softened to tenderness. "There's grit in the boy," he murmured. For Noel, with a black shade covering his bandaged eyes, was obviously as merry as any there. He was holding Peggy Musgrave perched on his shoulder, and his thin, brown face was upturned and laughing. There seemed to be some joke going on between them, for Peggy was also chuckling vigorously, and as Max watched, she slipped a caressing hand around Noel's chin and tenderly kissed him. Daisy and Will Musgrave were standing next to them, but they were plainly not thinking of Peggy or her cavalier. They were very close together, and hand in hand. It was nearly an hour later that Max joined the party as they came ashore. Noel's pleasure at meeting him was very obvious. He gripped him by both hands. "Old chap, you're a brick to come and meet me," he said. "I was thinking of asking Trevor, but I'd 10 times sooner have you." "Trevor's away," Max said. "I've come to take possession of you altogether. I suppose you've no objection." "Objection?" laughed Noel. He pushed his hand through his brother's arm. "You'll have to pilot me," he said. "I'm getting used to things, but I can't find my way in a crowd yet." And then came the meeting with Olga. It was very brief. For barely the fraction of a second her hand lay in Max's. Her greeting was quite inaudible. Noel turned to her. "Olga, Max wants me to clear out at once with him. You're going to Marriott's with Nick, of course. I shall come round to see you to-night." "Perhaps Olga will come and see you instead," said Max. "Is Dr. Jim spending the night in town? Bring him to dine. I will speak to him, shall I?" He passed on, and made the arrangement with Dr. Jim, not waiting for her reply. Then came a general rallying of the party, introductions and good-byes, fervent embraces from Peggy, good wishes and invitations on all sides, and at last the final departure of the two Wyndhams in Sir Kersley Whitton's motor. Noel removed his hat and leaned back with a sigh. "It's been a ripping voyage," he said, "but I'm deuced glad it's over." He added with a laugh, as Max made no comment, "I shall miss Peggy, though. She's been blind man's dog to me all through." "Let us hope you won't need a dog to lead you about much longer," said Max. Whereat Noel's hand came out gropingly with a certain diffidence. "Oh, man," he said, "I haven't dared to think of that." Max grasped the hand. "I'll do my best for you, old chap," he said, "but you'll need a thundering lot of patience." "I've been cultivating that," said Noel. "The only thing I can't stand is not to know the truth." "I shan't keep you in the dark," said Max. "It's not my way." He was as good as his word. A few hours later he made his first examination of the injury, and curtly gave it as his opinion that it was not beyond remedy. "I don't profess to be infallible," he said, "but there certainly seems to be just a chance that the sight has not been absolutely destroyed. I'm afraid you'll have a good deal to go through if it is to be restored, though. It will be a tough job for all concerned." "Oh, I'm not afraid of that," said Noel sturdily. "I've the very best of reasons for sticking to it." "Ah," said Max, with his twisted smile. "I haven't congratulated you yet." Noel turned with a quick movement. "I say, Max," he said, with a touch of embarrassment, "you weren't quite straight with me over that, were you?" "I don't know what you mean," said Max, in a voice that was utterly devoid of expression. Noel's face was red, but he stuck to his point. "You didn't tell me why she broke with you," he said. "Who did?" demanded Max. "Hunt-Goring." Max swallowed a remark which sounded more savage suppressed than if it had been fully audible. "You had a row with him, then?" "Yes, I did. I couldn't help it. I told him it was a damned lie," said Noel. Max grunted. Noel proceeded with a hint of that doggedness that characterized them both. "After that I saw Olga. It was before we got engaged. And I told her it was a lie, too." Max grunted again, stubbornly refraining from question or comment. Noel, equally stubborn, continued. "She said it was the truth, said you had admitted it to her. I didn't quite believe it even then. Thinking about it since, I am pretty sure you didn't actually do that. Or if you did, it was a lie." Max maintained an uncompromising silence. Noel waited a moment, then squarely tackled him. "Max, why did you lie to her?" "And if I didn't," said Max very deliberately. Noel made instant and winning reply. "Oh, you needn't ask me to believe that tomfool tale, old chap. I know you too well for that." "All right," said Max. "Then you know quite as much as is good for you. If you want to be ready in time to meet your fiancée, you had better let Kersley's man lend you a hand with your dressing. I will send him to you." He was at the door with the words. Noel heard him open it and go out. He sat where Max had left him with a puzzled frown between his brows. "I wish I knew the fellow's game," he murmured. "I wish " He broke off. What was the good of wishing? Moreover, to be quite honest, perhaps he was more or less satisfied with things as they were. Max had probably got over his disappointment to a certain extent by this time. It was quite obvious that he had no desire or intention to reopen the matter. No, on the whole, perhaps it was indiscreet to probe too deeply. Every man had a right to his own secrets. And meantime, Olga was his, and there remained this glorious possibility that his sight might be restored also. He put up his hands, suddenly covering those useless, tortured eyes. A very curious tremor went through him. His heart began to throb, thick and hard. It seemed too good to be true. Since that first awful day he had not fought against fate, refraining himself even in his worst hours of darkness and suffering, and now it seemed that fate was going to be kind after all. Like Job, he was to receive all, and more also, that he had lost. He broke into a quivering laugh. "Good old Job," he said. "We are not all such lucky beggars as that." And then again that odd little tremor went through him. It was like a warning, almost a presentiment. His hands fell. He sat straight and still as one waiting for a sign. No, such things didn't happen. Luck like Job's was apocryphal, abnormal, outside the bounds of human possibility. They might give him back his sight, but He stopped here as if brought up by a sudden obstacle. "I wonder if I'm a fool to have that operation," he said. "I wonder if she will like me as well if I get back my sight." The doubt pressed cold at his heart. She had been so divinely kind to him ever since the catastrophe. She had literally given herself up to him, making his darkness light. And vaguely he knew that she had loved the doing of it, had loved to know that he needed her. How would it be, he asked himself, when he needed her thus no longer? Would she love him as well in strength as in weakness? Would she be as near to him when he no longer needed her to lead him by the hand? He sprang to his feet with a gesture of fierce impatience. He flung the doubt away. Her love was not fashioned of so slender a fabric as this. What right had he to question it thus? But yet, despite all self-reproach, the doubt remained, repudiate it as he might. It went with him, even to her loved presence, refusing to be dislodged. She came with her father to dine in accordance with Max's invitation. The evening passed with absolute smoothness. Sir Kersley and Dr. Jim were old friends and had a good deal to say to one another. Max was present at the table, but withdrew early, alleging that he had a serious case to attend. Olga and Noel were left to themselves. They retired to Sir Kersley's drawing room and spent the rest of the evening there. Olga was evidently tired, and Noel provided most of the conversation. Noel was never silent for any length of time. He lay on the sofa talking with cheery inconsequence, scarcely pausing for any response, till presently he worked round to the subject of his blindness, a subject which by tacit consent they seldom discussed. "Max has had a look at me," he said. "He thinks they may be able to switch the light on again. They will have to tighten up a few screws, or something of the kind. He didn't let me into the whole ghastly process, but gave me to understand it wouldn't be exactly a picnic. I don't know how long it's going to take. Some time, I fancy. You'll pay me a visit now and then, won't you?" It was then that Olga came very suddenly out of her silence, moved impulsively to him, and knelt by his side, her hands on his. "Noel," she said. He turned to her swiftly, gathering her hands up to his lips. "What, darling?" "Noel." She paused an instant, then with a rush came the words, "Let us be married very soon. Let us be married before the operation." "My darling girl?" said Noel in astonishment. "Yes," she said rapidly. "I mean it. I wish it. Dad knows that I wish it. So does Nick. Nick is very good, you know. He is going to settle some money on me on my 21st birthday. So that needn't be a difficulty. We shall have enough to live upon." "And you think I'm going to live on you?" said Noel, still with her hands pressed hard against his cheek. "No," she said. "No. You've got something, I expect. That, with mine, would be enough." "I've got what my good brother-in-law allows me, besides my pay," said Noel. "I dare say, if the worst happened, he would make a settlement too. But I can't count on that. Besides, the worst isn't going to happen. So cheer up, darling. I shall go back to Badger's yet. Poor old boy. It was decent of him to pay me the compliment of being so cut up, wasn't it? I mustn't forget to send him a cable when the deed is done." He was switching the conversation into more normal channels with airy inconsequence, but Olga gently brought him back to the point. "Won't you consider my suggestion?" she said. He smiled then, his quick, boyish smile. "My darling, I have considered it. I'm afraid it isn't practicable. But thank you a million times over all the same." "Noel!" There was keen disappointment in her voice. "Why isn't it practicable?" He let her hands go and reached out, drawing her to him. "Don't tempt me, sweetheart," he said softly. "I'm hound enough as it is to dream of letting you join your life to mine under present conditions. But this other is out of the question. I simply won't do it, dear. So don't ask me." "But why not?" she pleaded very earnestly. "I have told you I wish it." He smiled, a smile that was very tender and yet whimsical also. "So like you, darling," he said. "But it can't be done. There are always chances to be taken in a serious operation. But I don't mean to take more than I can help. I'm not going to take chance by making you a widow almost before you are a wife." "Oh, but Noel," she protested. "Yes, really, darling. It's my final word on the subject. We will be married just as soon after the operation as can be decently managed. But not before it, sweetheart. Any fellow who let you do that would be a cur of the lowest degree." He was holding her in his arms with the words. Her head was against his shoulder. A man had entered the conservatory behind them from an adjoining room, lounging in with his feet in carpet slippers that made no sound. "And suppose," it was Olga's voice, very low and quivering, "suppose the operation doesn't succeed. Shall you refuse to marry me then?" "Not much," said Noel cheerily. "If I'm alive and kicking I shall want you all the more." No." He caught himself up sharply. "I don't mean that. I couldn't want you more. Ill or well, I should want you just the same. I only meant—" His voice grew subtly softer, he spoke with great tenderness, his lips moving against her forehead. "I only meant that the desert were a paradise, if thou wert there, if thou wert there." She raised her head quickly. There were tears in her eyes. "Noel, how strange that you should say that." "Say what, dear?" "That old song," she said, rather incoherently. It has memories for me, memories that hurt." "What memories?" he asked. But she could not tell him, and he passed the matter by. The man in the conservatory drew back with his hands deep in his pockets, and went back the way he had come. 26. A Fool's Errand. Dr. Jim's expectations, so far as Olga was concerned, were fulfilled. When he went back to Weir she remained in town with Nick and Muriel. But he did not go back alone. Will, Daisy and Peggy went with him. Daisy's love for Dr. Jim was almost as great as her love for Nick, and Will had spent his boyhood under his care. There was a cottage close to the doctor's house, which Daisy had tenanted 7 or 8 years before, when she had been obliged to come home for her health, and Will had been left behind in India. Dr. Jim had managed to secure this cottage a second time, and here they were soon installed with all the joy of exiles in an English spring. "But we are not going to forego the honeymoon," Will said on their first evening, as he and Daisy stood together in the ivy-covered porch. She laughed. That little laugh of hers, half gay, half sad, that seemed like a reminiscence of more mirthful days. "Isn't this romantic enough for you?" He slipped his arm about her waist. "I'm not altogether sure that I did right to let you come here," he said. "Oh, nonsense." She leaned her head against him with a very loving gesture. "I am not so morbid as that. I love to be here, and close to dear old Jim. He hasn't altered a bit. He is just as rugged and as sweet as ever." Will laughed. "How you women do love a masterful man." "Oh, not always," said Daisy. "There are certain forms of mastery in a man which to my mind are quite intolerable. Max Wyndham, for instance." "What? You've still got your knife into him? I'm sorry for the man myself," said Will. "It must be difficult, to say the least of it, to see his brother come home in possession of his girl and to keep smiling." "He doesn't care," said Daisy scathingly. "Geniuses haven't time to be human." "I wonder," said Will. He knew, and had never ceased to regret, his wife's share in the accomplishment of Mac's discomfiture; and he fancied that secretly, her antipathy notwithstanding, she had begun to regret it also. He changed the subject, and they went on to talk of Noel. "Olga tells me that they think of operating next Sunday," said Daisy. "How anxious she will be, poor girl. I am thankful she has Nick and Muriel to take care of her. It has been a terrible time for her all through." "Poor child," said Will compassionately. He shrewdly suspected that the time that lay ahead of Olga would be harder to face than any she had yet experienced. Olga herself had already begun to realize that. Noel's refusal to consider her suggestion had surprised and disappointed her. She had not anticipated his refusal, though she fully understood it and respected him for it. But it made matters infinitely more difficult for her. She longed for the time when Mac's part should be done, and he should have passed finally out of her life. Not that he intruded upon her in any way. He scarcely so much as glanced in her direction; but his very presence was a perpetual trial to her. She had a feeling that the green eyes were watching continually for some sign of weakness, even though they never looked her way. Nick was a great comfort to her in those days, but she felt that even he did not wholly grasp the difficulties of the situation. He supported her, indeed, but he did not realize precisely where lay the strain. And it was the same with Dr. Jim. He had accepted her engagement without demur after a gruff enquiry as to whether she loved the fellow. But he had not asked for any details, and had made no reference to her former engagement. She supposed that he found out all he wanted to know on this subject from Nick, and she was grateful for his forbearance, albeit, after a woman's fashion, slightly hurt by it. She had not, however, much time for reflection of any sort during those first days in town. Noel occupied all her thoughts. On the day before that fixed for the operation he went into a private nursing home. He was extremely cheery over all the preparations, and made himself exceedingly popular with his nurses before he had been more than a few hours in the place. Even Max was somewhat surprised by the boy's fund of high spirits, and Sir Kersley openly expressed his admiration. "You Wyndhams are a very remarkable family," he said to Max that night. Max smiled sardonically in recognition of the compliment. "But the boy has more backbone than I thought," he admitted. "I don't think he will give us much trouble after all, thanks to Olga." "Ah," Sir Kersley said. "You think this is due to her?" "In a great measure," said Max. Sir Kersley's face was grave. "I am afraid the strain is telling upon her," he said. "You think she looks ill?" Max shot the question with none of his customary composure. "No, not actually ill," Sir Kersley said, without looking at him. "But she is too thin, in my opinion, and she looks to me very highly strung." "She always was," said Max. "Yes. Well, she mustn't have a nervous breakdown if we can prevent it," said Sir Kersley gently. "No," Max agreed curtly. "She has got to keep up for Noel's sake." That seemed to be his main idea just then, his brother's welfare. Very resolutely he kept his mind fixed, with all the strength of which it was capable, upon that one object, and he was impatient of every distraction outside his profession. Late that night he went round for a last look at Noel, and was told by a smiling nurse that he had "gone to sleep as chirpy as a cricket." He went in to see him and found him slumbering like an infant. The pulse under Max's fingers was absolutely normal, and an odd smile that had in it an element of respect touched Max's grim lips. Certainly the boy had grit. The first sound he heard when he arrived at the home on the following day was Noel's heartiest laugh. He was enjoying a joke with one of the nurses, who was Irish herself and extremely gay of heart. But the moment Max entered he sobered, and asked for Olga. Olga was in the building with Nick, but they had thought it advisable to keep visitors away from him on the morning of the operation. Noel, however, was absolutely immovable on the point, refusing flatly to proceed until he had seen her. So for 5 short minutes Olga was admitted and left alone with him. More than once during those minutes his cheery laugh made itself heard again. He had 101 things to say, not one of which could Olga ever remember afterwards save the last, when, holding her close to him, he whispered, "And if I don't come out of it, sweetheart, you're to marry another fellow, see? No damn sentimental rot on my account, mind. I never was good enough for you, God knows. There, run along. Goodbye." His kiss was the briefest he had ever given her, but there was something in the manner of its bestowal that pierced her to the heart. Her own farewell was inarticulate. She was only just able to restrain her tears. But she mastered her weakness almost immediately, for Max was waiting in the passage outside. He was talking to a nurse, and she would have slipped past him without recognition, but he broke off abruptly and joined her, walking back with her to the room where Nick was waiting. "Look here," he said. "I don't think you need to be so anxious. I give you my word I believe the operation will be a success." It was so contrary to his custom to express an opinion in this way, that Olga raised her eyes almost involuntarily to gaze at him. His eyes met and held them instantly. He looked at her with a species of stern kindness that seemed to thrust away all painful memories. "Even if it isn't a success," he said, "I won't let him die, I promise you. Now, will you follow my advice for once?" "Yes," she murmured, wondering at her own docility. He smiled upon her with instant approval, and her heart gave a wild leap that almost made her gasp. "That's wise of you," he said in that voice of cool encouragement that she remembered so well. So well. Then get Nick to take you for a walk that'll last for an hour and a half. Go and look at the frogs in the Serpentine. Awfully interesting things, frogs. And have a glass of milk before you start. Goodbye." Strong and steady, his hand closed upon hers, gave it a slight admonitory shake, and set it free. The next moment he had turned and was striding back along the corridor. Olga stood and watched him out of sight, but he did not turn his head. The search for frogs in the Serpentine was scarcely as engrossing a pastime as Nick could have desired for the amusement of his charge on that sunny April morning, but he did his valiant best to keep her thoughts on the move. He compelled her to talk when she yearned to be silent, and again in a vague, disjointed fashion Olga wondered at his lack of penetration. Yet, since he was actually obtuse enough to misunderstand her preoccupation and to be even mildly hurt thereby, she exerted herself for his sake to respond intelligently to his remarks. So, with cheery indifference on his part, and aching suspense on hers, they passed that dreadful interval of waiting. On the return journey Olga's knees shook so much that they would scarcely support her, and then it was that Nick seemed suddenly to awake to the situation. He gave her a swift glance and abruptly offered his arm. "There, Kitty, there," he said softly. "Keep a stiff upper lip. It's nearly over." She accepted his help in silence, and in silence they pursued their way. Nick looked at her no more, nor spoke. His lips were twitching a little, but he showed no other sign of feeling. So they came at last to the tall building behind its iron railings that hid so many troubles from the world. The door opened to them, and they went within. Silence and a curious, clinging perfume met them as they entered. Olga stood still. She was white to the lips. "Nick," she said in a voiceless whisper. "Nick, that is the pain-killer." And then, very quietly, from a room close by, Max came to them. He glanced at Nick, and nodded. There was an odd, exultant look in the green eyes. He took Olga's hands very firmly into his own. "It's all right," he said. She stared at him, trying to make her white lips form a question. "It's all right," he said again. "Well over. As satisfactory as it could possibly be. Now don't be silly." Surely it was the Max of old times speaking. "Pull up while you can. Come in here and sit down for a minute. I'm going to take you to see him directly." That last remark did more towards restoring Olga's self-control than any of the preceding ones. She went with him submissively, making strenuous efforts to preserve her composure. She even took without a murmur the wine-glass of sal volatile with which he presented her. Max stood beside her, still holding one of her hands, his fingers grasping her wrist, and talked over her head to Nick. "Absolutely normal in every way. Came round without the least trouble. He'll be on his legs again in a fortnight. Of course we shan't turn him loose for a month, and he will have to live in the dark. But he ought to be absolutely sound in 6 weeks from now." "And he will see?" whispered Olga. Max bent and laid her hand down. He looked at her closely for a moment. "Yes," he said, "there is no reason why he shouldn't make a complete recovery. Are you all right now? I promised to let him have a word with you." She stood up. "Yes, I am quite all right. Let us go." Her knees still felt weak, but she steadied them resolutely. They went out side by side. In silence Max piloted her. When they reached the darkened room he took her hand again and led her forward. The cheerful Irish nurse was at the bedside, but she drew away at their approach. And Olga found herself standing above a swathed, motionless figure in hushed expectancy of she knew not what. The hand that held hers made as if to withdraw itself, but she clung to it suddenly and convulsively, and it closed again. "All right," said Max's leisurely tones. "He's a bit sleepy still. Noel." He bent, still holding her hand. "I've brought Olga, old chap, as I promised. Say good night to her, won't you?" The voice was the voice of Max Wyndham, but its tenderness seemed to rend her heart. She could have wept for the pain of it, but she knew she must not weep. The figure in the bed stirred, murmured an incoherent apology, seemed to awake. "Oh, is Olga there?" said Noel drowsily. "Take care of her, Max, old boy. Make her as happy as you can. She's awfully fond of you, though I'm not supposed to know." The voice trailed off, sank into unconsciousness. Max's hand had tightened to a hard grip. He straightened himself and spoke, coldly, grimly. "He isn't quite himself yet. I'm afraid I've brought you on a fool's errand. You can kiss him if you like. He probably won't know." But Olga could not. She turned from the bed with the gesture of one who could bear no more, and without further words he led her from the room. End of chapters 25 and 26. Part 2, Chapter 27 of The Keeper of the Door by Ethel Dell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 27. Love makes all the difference.
"I've been prayin' for you, dear Noel," said Peggy importantly, with her arms round her hero's neck.
"Have you, though?" said Noel. "I say, little pal, how decent of you. How often?"
"Ever so many times," said Peggy. "Every mornin', every evenin', and after grace besides."
"By Jove!" said Noel. "What did you say?"
"I said," Peggy swelled with triumph, "lighten Noel's darkness, we beseech thee, O Lord."
"Why, that's what I said!" ejaculated Noel.
"Did you?"
cried Peggy excitedly.
"Did you really? Oh, Noel, then that's how it was, isn't it?"
"Quite so," said Noel. He sat on the sofa in Daisy's little drawing room with his small playfellow on his knee. They had not seen each other for 6 weeks. And in those weeks Noel had been transformed from a blind man to a man who saw, albeit through thick blue spectacles that emphasized the pallor of illness to such an alarming degree that Daisy had almost wept over him at sight. Peggy, more practical in her sympathy, had gathered him straightway to her small but ardent bosom and refused to let him go. So they sat in the drawing room, tightly locked, and related to each other all the doings of their separation. "I wonder you're not afraid of me in these hideous goggles," Noel said once. To which Peggy replied with indignation,
"I'm not a baby."
"And Olga has gone to Brethaven, has she?" he asked presently.
"Yes,"
said Peggy wisely.
"Dr. Jim said she must have some sea air to make her fat again. So Captain Nick came yesterday and took her away. And do you know," said Peggy, "I'm going there too very soon."
"What ho!" said Noel. "Are they going to let you stay there all by yourself?" Peggy nodded.
"Daddy and Mummy are going away all by theirselves, so I'm going away all by myself."
"And who's going to slap you and put you to bed when you're naughty?" Noel inquired rudely. "Nick?"
"No," said Peggy, affronted. "Captain Nick's a gentleman."
"Is he, though? Nasty snub for Noel Wyndham, Esquire," observed Noel. "Sorry, Peggy. Then, unless Mrs. Nick rises nobly to the occasion, I'm afraid you'll go unslapped." "Dear, dear, what a misfortune! I shall have to come down now and then and see what I can do." Peggy embraced him again ecstatically at this suggestion.
"Yes, dear Noel, yes. Come often, won't you?"
"Rather," said Noel cheerily. "I believe I'm going to be married some time soon, by the way," he added as an afterthought. Peggy's face fell.
"Oh, Noel, not really?"
"Why not really?" said Noel. Peggy exclaimed with a little quiver in her voice.
"You did always say that when I was growed up you'd marry me."
"Oh, is that all?" said Noel. "That's easily done. I'll get permission to have 2. Whom does one ask? The Pope, isn't it? I'll go and cultivate his acquaintance on my honeymoon."
"What's a honeymoon?"
said Peggy. Noel burst into his merriest laugh and sprang to his feet. "It's the nicest thing in the world.
I'll tell you all about it when we're married, Pegtop. Meantime, will you take me to see the great Dr. Jim? I want to inveigle him into lending me his motor." "Oh, are you going to Brethaven?" asked Peggy eagerly. "Take me. Do, dear Noel." "What for?" said Noel. "Reggie lives there," said Peggy. "And Reggie's got some rabbits. Big white ones." "But suppose they don't want you?" objected Noel. "Suppose they don't want you?" countered Peggy, clinging ingratiatingly to his hand. "Then you can come and play with me and the rabbits, and Reggie." Noel stooped very suddenly and kissed her. "What an excellent idea, Pegtop," he said. "There's nothing more useful when the road is blocked than to secure a good line of retreat." Peggy looked up at him with puzzled eyes, but she did not ask him what he meant. It was on that same afternoon that Olga found herself wandering along the tiny glen in the Redlands grounds that had been her favourite resort in childhood. It was only 2 days since she had left town, urged thereto by Dr. Jim, who insisted that she had been there too long already. Nick, moreover, who had patiently chaperoned her for the past 5 weeks, was wanting to rejoin his wife, who had returned to Redlands soon after Noel's operation. And Noel himself, though still undergoing treatment at his brother's hands, had so far recovered as to be able to leave the home, and take up his abode temporarily with Sir Kersley Whitton and Max. He had cheerily promised to follow her in a day or two; and Olga, persuaded on all sides, had yielded without much resistance, though not very willingly. She had a curious reluctance to return to her home. Something, that hovering phantom that she had almost forgotten, had arisen once more to menace her peace. And she was afraid, she knew not wherefore. She was happier in Noel's society than in any other. To see him daily growing stronger was her one unalloyed pleasure, and curiously, when with him she was never so acutely conscious of that chill shadow. Of Max she saw practically nothing. He was always busy, almost too busy to notice her presence, it seemed, a fact that hurt her vaguely, even while it gave her relief. There was another fact that imparted the same kind of miserable comfort, and that was that Noel, though impetuous and loving as ever, never made any but the most casual allusions to their marriage. She could only conclude that he was waiting to make a complete recovery, and she would not herself broach the subject a second time. She did not actually want him to speak, but it grieved her a little that he did not do so. She did not for a moment doubt his love, but she felt that she did not possess the whole of his confidence, and the feeling made her vaguely uneasy. She had been so ready to give all that he had desired. How was it he was so slow to take? These thoughts were running persistently in her mind as she moved along the edge of the stream. It was a day in the end of May, fragrant with many perfumes, crystallized with spring sunshine. Such a day as she would have revelled in only last year. Only last year. How many things had happened since then. She was almost afraid to think. There came the sound of feet on the drive above, and a cracked voice hailed her. "Hullo, Olga mia. How are you amusing yourself?" She looked up with a smile. Last year she would have sprung to meet him, but she seemed to have outgrown all her impulsiveness lately. She moved to meet him indeed, but he was at her side before she had moved a couple of yards. He caught her hand in his and drew her to the water's edge. His eyes flickered over her and went beyond. "Hullo, there goes the green dragonfly," he said. She looked round, startled. "Oh, Nick, where?" "Gone away," said Nick unconcernedly. "He'll come back again, I'll wager. What's the programme for this morning, Kitty? Anything special?" "Nothing," said Olga. Again, rapidly, his eyes comprehended her. "I'm going to the Priory myself," he announced unexpectedly. "Care to come?" She started again, coloured, then went very white. "I don't know, Nick," she faltered. "Might as well, dear," said Nick persuasively. "There's no one there. Did I tell you about the landslip? There was a bad one last February, and the old place is beginning to crack in all directions. It's been condemned as unsafe, and Campion is going to clear out bag and baggage. He hasn't lived there, you know, since last summer."
They've taken to traveling. Wouldn't you like to come and see it once more before it is dismantled?" Olga was standing very still. She did not seem to be breathing. Only the hand Nick had taken vibrated in his hold. "Don't come if you don't like," he said. "But it's your last chance. They are going to start clearing it tomorrow. I've got to go myself to fetch poor old Cork. You remember Cork? Campion has handed him over to me." Yes, Olga remembered Cork. She drew in a deep breath and spoke. "Dear old dog. I'm glad you are going to have him. Yes, Nick, I'll come. But is the place really doomed? What will happen to it?" "It will probably fall in first," said Nick. "And the next big landslide it will go over the cliff." "How dreadful!" said Olga, and added to herself, "Violet was wondering only that morning if she would live to see it." "Ah," said Nick. He was leading her through the glen that led down to the shore. "It was bound to happen sometime," he said, "but they didn't think it would be so soon." Olga went with him as one moving in a dream, submitting, though not of her own conscious volition. Nick said no more. He had chosen the shortest route, and his main object was to accomplish the distance without disturbing her thoughts. They came out at length upon the shore, where the stream from the glen gurgled and fell in bubbling cascades into its channel on the beach. The sun poured full over a sea of blue and purple, threaded with silvery pathways here and there. Olga paused for a moment, as it were instinctively, because from her earliest childhood she had always paused in just that spot to drink in the beauty of the scene. Nick waited beside her, alert but patient. When she turned along the beach he turned also, walking close to her over the stones, saying no word. They came to the hollow in the rocks where she and Violet had rested on that summer morning, and again Olga paused with her face to the sea. A curious little spasm passed across it as she looked. Far away a white sail floated over the blue, and the cries of circling gulls came to them over the water. There was no other sound but the long, long roar of the sea. Again, in utter silence, Olga turned, pursuing her way. They reached the cliff path, that still remained intact, and began to climb. The way was steep, but she did not seem aware of it. Nick, lithe and agile, followed her step for step. His yellow face was full of anxious wrinkles. He looked neither to right nor left, watching her only. Olga never paused in the ascent. She went unswervingly, as though drawn by some magnetic force above. Reaching the summit of the cliff, she turned at once from the Redlands ground, and struck across towards the boundary of the Priory. Nick fell into pace beside her again, vigilant as an eagle guarding its young in the first terrifying flight, not offering help, but ready to give it at the first sign of weakness. But Olga gave no such sign. Only as they came in sight of the old grey building, standing stark and gaunt above them, she uttered a sudden sigh that seemed to break from her in spite of rigid restraint. And a moment later she quickened her pace. They passed at length around a buttressed corner, and so on to the yew-lined drive that led to the front of the house. The Gothic archway gaped wide to the spring sunshine. Olga came swiftly to it, and there stood suddenly still. "Nick," she said. "Nick." Her voice was vibrant, her eyes widely staring into the gloom within. He slipped his arm about her, that wiry arm of great strength that had served her so often. "I am here, darling," he said soothingly. Olga turned to him in piteous appeal. "Nick," she whispered. "Where is she? Where? He answered her steadfastly, with the absolute conviction of one who knew. "She is there, beyond the door, dear. You'll find her some day, waiting for you, where it is given to all of us to wait for those we love." But Olga only trembled at his words. "What door, Nick?" she asked. Do you mean death?" "We call it death," he said. She scarcely heard his answer. She was shaking from head to foot. "Oh, Nick," she gasped. I'm frightened. I daren't go on." His arm encircled her more strongly still. He almost lifted her forward over the threshold into the cold and gloomy hall.
"Don't be frightened, darling. I'm with you," he said. She would have hung back, but her strength was gone. She tottered weakly whither he led. In a moment she was sitting on the old oak chest with her face to the sunshine, just as she had sat on that golden afternoon when she had come to summon Violet to her aid. She covered her face and shivered. Surely the place was haunted. Haunted. In a grim procession memories began to crowd upon her. With shrinking vision she beheld, and all the while Nick stood beside her, holding her hand, sustaining even while he compelled. "Do you remember?" he said, and again as she shrank and quivered. "Do you remember?" There was something ruthless about him during those moments, something she had never encountered before, something against which she knew she would oppose herself in vain. For the first time she saw the man as he was, felt the colossal strength of him, quivered beneath his mastery. He was forcing her towards an obstacle from which every racked nerve winced in horror. He was driving her, and he meant to drive her, into conflict with a force that threatened to overwhelm her utterly. "Oh, let me go, Nick. Let me go," she cried in agonized entreaty. "It's more than I can bear." He knelt beside her. He held her close. "Darling," he said, "face it. Face it, just this once. It's for your own peace of mind I'm doing it." And then she knew that no cry of hers would move him. He was ready to help her, if he could. But he would not suffer her to flee before that dread procession that had begun to wind like a fiery serpent through her brain. So, in a quivering anguish of spirit, such as she had never before known, she sat and faced it, faced the advancing phantom, from the shadowy presence of which she had so often shrunk appalled. And the beat of her heart rose up in the silence above the sound of the sea, till she thought the mad race of it would kill her. Slowly the seconds throbbed away, the torture swept towards her. She was as one who, fascinated, watches a forest fire while he waits to be engulfed. Presently, from the shadows behind, the great dog Cork came like a ghost and gave them stately welcome. He licked Olga's quivering hands, standing beside her in earnest solicitude. Nick rose to his feet and moved a little away. His hand was hard clenched against his side. He could not help it seemed. He could only look on in impotence while she suffered. Slowly at last Olga raised her head and looked at him with tragic eyes. Her face was white and strained, but she had in a measure regained her self-control. "I am going upstairs," she said. "Just for a little while. Don't come with me, Nick. Wait for me. Wait for me." She rose with the words, swayed a little, then recovered herself, and with her hand on Cork's head, moved slowly away down the great hall. Dumbly Nick stood and watched the slim young figure with the wolfhound pacing gravely beside it. At the end, immediately below the east window, she paused, and he saw her drawn face upraised to the dreadful picture above her. Then, still slowly, she turned, and with the dog passed out of sight under the southern archway. For a long, long space he waited in the utter stillness. He had faced a good many difficulties in his life, and endured a good many adversities, but this thing stood by itself, unique in his experience, with a pain that was all its own. He would have given much to have gone with her, to have held her up while the storm raged round her, to have borne with her that which it seemed she could only bear alone. But since this was denied him, he could only wait with set teeth while his little pal went through that fiery trial of hers, wait and picture her agonizing in solitude, wait till she should come back to him with all the gladness gone for ever from her eyes, a woman who could never be young again. Slowly the minutes dragged on till half an hour had passed. He fell to pacing up and down in a fever of anxiety. Would she never come back? She had begged him to wait for her, but he began to feel he could not wait any longer. The suspense was becoming intolerable. Desperately he marked another quarter of an hour crawl by leaden-footed, moment by moment. And still she did not come. He went for the last time to the open door and looked forth relentlessly.
The warmth of the spring sunshine spread everywhere like a benediction. It was only within those walls of crumbling stone that it found no place. A sudden shiver went through him. He turned abruptly inwards. She should not stay alone in the vault-like solitude any longer. Surely anything must be better for her than that. With quick strides he went down the old dim hall that once had been the chapel of the monks, turned sharply through the second archway, and approached the staircase beyond. And then very suddenly he stopped. For there, above him at the open staircase window that looked upon the sea, stood Olga. The afternoon sunshine streamed in upon her, and she seemed to be stretching out her hands to it, basking in the generous glow. Her face was upturned to the splendor. Her eyes were closed. For a moment or two Nick stood narrowly watching her, then as suddenly as he had come he withdrew. For Olga's lips were moving, and it seemed to him that she was no longer alone. He went back to the porch and stood in the sunshine, waiting with renewed patience. 10 minutes later a moist nose nozzled its way into his hand. He looked down into Cork's eyes of faithful friendliness. Then, hearing a light footfall, he turned. Olga had come back to him at last. Straight to him she came, moving swiftly. Her face was still pale and very wan, but the strained look had utterly passed away. Her eyes sought his with fearless confidence, and Nick's heart gave a jerk of sheer relief. He had expected tragedy, and he beheld peace. She reached him. She laid her hands upon his shoulders. A tremulous smile hovered about her lips. Nick, darling," she said. Why didn't you tell me all this long ago?" He stood before her dumb with astonishment. For once he was utterly and completely at a loss. She slipped her hand through his arm, and drew him out. "Let us go into the sun," she said. And then, as the glow fell around them, "Oh, Nick, I'm so thankful that I know the truth at last." "Are you, dear?" he said. "Well, I certainly think it is time you knew it now." "I ought to have known it sooner," she said. "Why did you and Max, let me believe a lie?" He hesitated momentarily. "We thought it would be easier for you than the truth," he said then. "You mean Max thought so?" she said quickly. "You didn't, Nick." "Perhaps not," he admitted. "I'm sure you didn't," she said. "You know me better than that." Again she stood still in the sunshine, lifting her face to the glory. "Love conquers so many things," she said. "All things," put in Nick quickly. She looked at him again. "I don't know about all things, Nick," she said. "I have proved it," he said. She shook her head slowly. "But I haven't." She passed from the subject as if it were one she could not bear to discuss openly. "What made you think the truth would hurt me so, I wonder? It was only the first great shock I couldn't bear. That nearly killed me. But now that it is over, and I can see clearly again, Nick, tell me, as her friend, her only friend, could I have done anything else?" Nick was silent. He had asked himself the same question many times, that had not found an answer. "Nick," she said pleadingly, "none but a friend could have done it. It was an act of love." "I know it was," he said. "And yet you blame me." Her voice was low, full of the most earnest entreaty. "You blamed Max," he pointed out. "Oh, but Max didn't love her." He heard a note of quick pain in her voice. "Oh, don't you see," she said, "how love makes all the difference? Surely that was what St. Paul meant when he said that love was the fulfilling of the law. Nick, you must agree with me in this. It was utterly hopeless. Think of it. Think of it. If she had been living now." A sudden hard shiver went through her. "Nick, if I had been in her place, wouldn't you have done the same for me?" "I don't know," he said. But she clung to him more closely. "You do know, dear. You do know." And then Nick did a strange, impulsive thing. He suddenly flung down his reserve and bared to her his inmost soul. "Yes, Olga mia, I do know," he said. "I would have done the same for you. I nearly did the same for Muriel when we were in a tight corner long ago at Warra. But whether it's right or whether it's wrong, God alone can judge. It may be we take too much upon us, or it may be He means us to do it. That is what I have never yet decided. But I solemnly believe with you that love makes all the difference. Love is the one extenuating circumstance which He will recognize and pass. It isn't the outward appearance that counts. It's just the heart of things." He stopped. Olga was listening with earnest attention, her pale face rapt. For a moment as he ceased to speak, their eyes met, and between them there ran the old electric current of sympathy, reconnected and entire. "Oh, Nick," she said, "you never fail me. You always understand." But Nick shook his head in whimsical denial. "No, not always, believe me, being but a man. But I've learnt to hide my ignorance by taking the difficult bits for granted. For instance, I didn't expect you to take this thing so sensibly. If I had, I should have acted very differently long ago." "Do you call me sensible, Nick?" she said with a wistful smile. "Not in all respects, dear," said Nick. "But you have shown more sense than I expected on this occasion." "Did you expect me to be very badly upset?" she asked. "Nick, shall I tell you something? You'll think me fanciful, perhaps. Yet I don't know. Very likely you will understand. I've had a feeling for such a long, long time that that Violet, was calling to me, and I could never hear what she wanted to say. Today, at last, I have been in touch with her, and I know that all is well." She turned her face up to the sun again, speaking with closed eyes. "I know that she is safe. I know that she is happy. And Nick, her voice thrilled on the words, I know that she loves me still." Nick bared his head with reverence. His face was strangely moved, but the restless eyes were steadfast as he made reply. "That, dear, is just the omnipotence of love. You can't explain it. It's too great a thing to grasp. You can only feel the pull of the everlasting chain that binds us to those beyond." "It is wonderful," she whispered. "Wonderful." "It is divine," said Nick. End of chapter 27. Part 2, chapters 28 through 30 of The Keeper of the Door by Ethel Dell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 28. A Soldier and a Gentleman. When Nick returned to Redlands he was alone. Olga had gone down again to the shore. She wanted to be by herself a little longer, she said. He didn't mind. No, Nick minded nothing, so long as all went well with her. And on her promise that all should be well, he left her with Cork for guardian. He went back to Redlands over the cliffs, entering his own grounds by a low wire fence, and thence turning inwards towards the garden. The sounds of gay voices reached him as he approached, and he speedily found himself caught in a lively ambush that consisted of Peggy, Reggie, and Noel. He naturally fled for his life, but was overtaken by the latter and held down while the two accomplices rifled his pockets. By the rules of the game all coppers found therein were confiscated, and this regulation having been duly observed, the prisoner was allowed to sit up and converse with his principal captor, while the rest of the gang divided the spoils. "Have a cigarette?" said Noel. "Thanks. Mighty generous of you." Nick righted his tumbled attire and accepted the proffered weed. "If it isn't a rude question, what are you doing here?" Noel's eyes laughed across at him gaily through the blue spectacles. "I should have thought you might have guessed that I'm spending a night or two with the Musgraves, but I am under a solemn oath to return to Max by noon on Friday, in order to have another dose of some infernal stuff with which he is peppering my eyes. He didn't much want me to come away, as it meant postponing the torture for a few hours." But I managed to get on the soft side of him for once, though he is holding himself in preparation for an immediate summons in case my vision should take advantage of my absence from him to play any nasty tricks." "I see," said Nick. "And how is the vision?" "Oh, all right, so far as it goes. Gives me beans upon occasion, for which Max always swears at me as if it were my fault. I'm not allowed to see by artificial light at all, so after sunset I join the bats. Lucky for me the sun sits up late just now. By the way, I had a positively gushing epistle from old Badgers this morning. He seems almost hysterical at the thought of getting me back again. Says that married or single, I've got to go." Noel stopped to take in a long breath of smoke. Then, very abruptly, "Where's Olga?" he demanded. Nick nodded in the direction whence he had come. "Down on the shore." Noel was on his feet in a second. "All right. You can be a nurse for a bit now. See you later." He would have swung away with the words, but Nick had also risen, and with a swift word he detained him. "I say, Noel." Noel stopped. "Hello?" "Look here," said Nick rapidly. "She isn't wanting anyone just yet. We have just been to the Priory, she and I, in accordance with Sir Kersley's advice, of which I told you. She is having a quiet think. Don't disturb her." Noel stood still. He had stiffened somewhat at the words, but there was no dismay discernible about him. He faced that which had to be faced without flinching. "You mean she knows?" he asked slowly. "Yes," said Nick. "But I didn't tell her." "Did she remember, then?" "Yes. It all came back to her." "What effect did it have? Was is she very badly upset?" The sharp falter in the words betrayed more than the speaker knew. Nick turned away from him, grinding his heel into the turf. "No. She took it remarkably quietly on the whole, seemed relieved to know the truth." "And Max? Did she mention him?" "Yes. She seemed glad to know that he was not responsible, but rather hurt that he had thought it necessary to concoct a lie for her benefit." "Exactly what I should have felt myself," said Noel. He paused a moment. Then, "It was decent of you to let me into that secret," he observed. "Oh, that was Sir Kersley's doing." Nick still spoke with his back half turned. "He tackled me on the subject, said you ought to know, but that Max was averse to it. Then I told him why. It seems that he hadn't the vaguest notion till then as to why the engagement was broken off." Noel nodded. "Just like Max. He's a bit too clever sometimes. Well, what did he say when he knew?" "He said that if Max wouldn't take the responsibility of setting matters right, he would. And he advised me to tell you everything straight away, which I did," said Nick, "at peril of my life. I don't know how Max will take it, but it will doubtless be on my devoted head that his wrath will descend." "You'll survive that," said Noel. "But look here. Tell me more about Olga. Wasn't she horribly shocked? Just at first?" "It was touch and go," said Nick. "I followed Sir Kersley's advice throughout. He didn't want me to tell her outright, and I didn't. The whole thing came to her gradually. Yes, it was a bit of a strain to begin with. But she has come through it all right. Give her time to settle, and I don't think she will be any the worse." "I see," said Noel. He relaxed very suddenly, and passed a boyishly familiar arm around Nick's shoulders. "Well, that cooks my goose quite effectually, doesn't it? Lucky it's come to me gradually, too. I shouldn't have relished it all in a lump. The only person who is going to have a shock over this little business is Max. And you'll admit he deserves one." "What are you going to do?" asked Nick. "Do? Send him a wire, of course." "Who? Max?" "Yes, Max. And I shall say, 'Come at once. Urgent. Noel.' That'll fetch him," said Noel with a twinkle. "He's making a specialty of me just now. He ought to be here before 8. "And what about Olga?" "Leave Olga to me," said Noel. Nick glanced up at him and abruptly did so. "You're a sportsman, my son," he observed affectionately. "But to return to Max, doesn't it occur to you that it may not be precisely convenient for him to come posting down here at a moment's notice? He's an important man, remember." But Noel here displayed a touch of his old imperious spirit. "Who the devil cares for Max?" he demanded. "He's just got to come, and if he doesn't like it he can go hang. Surely a fellow may be permitted to settle who is to be asked to his own funeral." "Oh, if you put it like that," said Nick. "Well, it is like that. See?" There was a comic touch to Noel's tragedy notwithstanding, and Nick divined with a satisfaction that he was careful to conceal that the role he had taken upon himself was not altogether distasteful to him. The funeral arrangements obviously had their attractive side. "Well, my boy, fix it up as you think best," he said, giving him as ample a squeeze as his one arm could compass. "You're a soldier and a gentleman, and whatever you do will have my full approval." "What ho!" said Noel, highly gratified. They parted then, going their separate ways. Noel to send his message, Nick in pursuit of the two children. And so the rest of the afternoon wore away. Muriel had tea laid in the old oak-panelled dining room, and thither Nick presently marshalled his charges, to find his wife serenely waiting for them in solitude. "Hasn't Olga come in yet?" he asked. "Yes, dear, some time ago. But she looked so tired, poor child," said Muriel. "I persuaded her to go up to her room and lie down. She has had some tea." "She will be all right?" asked Nick quickly. "I think so. She looks quite worn out. She seems to need a sleep more than anything," said Muriel. He gave her a quick look. "You saw Noel?" "Yes. He came in and talked for a few minutes after he left you. He seems a very nice boy." A faint smile touched Muriel's lips. Nick laughed, pulling her hand round his neck as she brought him his tea. "Lost your heart to him, eh? It's quite the usual thing to do. Where has he gone?" "He came over in Jim's motor and has gone away in it again. He didn't say where he was going." "Gone away without me?" ejaculated Peggy in consternation. "He'll come back again, my chicken. Don't you worry," said Nick. "Here, have a jam sandwich." "I want Noel," said Peggy. "Where is Noel?" "He has gone out on business," said Nick. "Which reminds me," he added to Muriel, "his brother Max will probably be here this evening to spend the night." "Max?" "Yes. Don't mention it upstairs. Noel is pulling the wires, so be prepared for anything." "What wires is Noel pullin'?" Peggy wanted to know. "Telegraph wires," said Reggie brightly. "Yes, telegraph wires," chuckled Nick. "I think I'll just go up for a second, Muriel. I shan't wake her up if she's asleep." He was gone with the words, swift and noiseless as a bird on the wing, and 5 seconds later was scratching very softly at Olga's door. Her voice bade him enter immediately, and he went in. She was lying on her bed, but the blind was up and the windows wide. She held out her arms to him. "Nick, darling." "Ever yours to command," said Nick. He went to her, stooping while the arms wound round his neck. She held him tightly. "Nick," she whispered, "is Noel still here?" "No, darling. Do you want him?" She drew a sharp breath. I'm afraid I dodged him a little while ago. I simply couldn't meet him just then. Has he been looking for me? Did he wonder where I was?" "Don't think so," said Nick. "He was playing with the kids. He is spending a couple of nights with the Musgraves, and he brought Peggy over." "And he has gone again?" Faint wonder sounded in her voice. "Only temporarily. He wanted to send a message to someone from the post office. But he is coming back, presumably for Peggy." "I see." She was silent for a few moments, and Nick sat down on the edge of the bed. "Nick," she said at length, speaking with obvious effort, Will he be very hurt, do you think? If I don't see him to day?" "Shouldn't say so, darling," said Nick. She slipped her hand into his. "I've got to do a lot of thinking, Nick," she said rather piteously. "Can I help?" said Nick. She shook her head with a quivering smile. "No, dear. It's a one-man job. But if you don't mind, tell Noel I'm rather tired, but I'll come over to Weir in the morning. I'm going to tell him everything," she ended, squeezing his hand very tightly. "Quite right, dear," said Nick. "Yes, but before I tell him, I want to write to Max." Olga's voice was very low. "I must put things right with him first. I must ask him to forgive me." "Forgive you, sweetheart?" "Yes, for being very unkind to him." Olga's lips quivered again, and suddenly her eyes were full of tears. "I feel as if I've been running into things in the dark, and doing a lot of harm," she said. "Of course everything is quite over between us. He will understand that. But I want to be friends with him, if he will let me. Nick, dear, that's all. Hadn't you better go and have your tea?" "And leave you to weep?" said Nick, with his face screwed up. "No, I don't think so." "I'm not going to," she assured him. "I'm going to be awfully sensible. Really I am. Kiss me, Nick darling, and go." He bent over her. "You mustn't cry," he urged pathetically. She clasped him close. "No, I won't. Nick, dearest, you're the very sweetest man in the world. I always have thought so, and I always shall. There." "Ah, well, it's a comparatively harmless illusion," said Nick, with his quizzical grimace. "I'll endeavour to live up to it. Sure you want me to go?" "Yes, you must go, dear. I'm sure Muriel is wanting you. I've monopolized you long enough. You'll tell Noel, won't you? Is he all right?" "At the very top of his form," said Nick. She smiled. "I'm so very glad. Give him my love, Nick. My best love." "I will," said Nick. He stood up. "He's a fine chap, Noel," he said. "He deserves the best, and I hope some day he'll get it." With which enigmatical remark he wheeled and left her. 29. The Man's Point of View. That letter to Max was perhaps the hardest task that Olga had ever undertaken. She spent the greater part of 3 hours over it, oblivious of everything else; and then, close upon the dinner hour, tore up all previous efforts in despair, and scribbled a brief, informal note that was curiously reminiscent of one she had written once in a moment of impulsive penitence, and pinned inside his hat. "Dear Max," it ran, "I want to tell you that everything has come back to me, and I am very, very sorry. Will you forgive me, and let us be friends for the future? Yours, Olga." This letter she addressed and stamped and took downstairs with her, laying it upon the hall table to be posted. Thence she passed on to the library to find a book she wanted. The glow of sunset met her on the threshold, staying the hand she raised to the electric switch. She moved slowly through the dying light to the window and stood before it motionless, gazing forth into the glory. It poured around her in a rosy splendor, lighting her pale, tired face. For several minutes she stood drinking in the beauty of it, with a feeling at her heart as of unshed tears. Then at last, with a long sigh, she slowly turned, and moved across to a row of bookshelves. Perhaps there was light enough for her purpose after all. She began to search along the backs of the books, with her face close to them. "Are you looking for Pharaoh's treatise on party government, by any chance?" asked a leisurely voice behind her. She sprang round as if a gun had been discharged in the room. She stared widely, feeling back against the bookshelves for support. He was lounging on the edge of the table immediately facing her, a square, strong figure, with hands in his pockets, the red light of the sunset turning his hair to fire. "Because if you are," he continued, a note of grim humor in his voice, "I'm afraid you won't find it tonight. What's the matter with you, fair lady? You don't seem quite pleased to see me." "I am pleased," she whispered. "I am pleased." But her voice was utterly gone. Her throat worked spasmodically. She put up both hands to it as if she were choking. He stood up abruptly and came to her. He took her hands and drew them gently away. "I shall begin to think I'm bad for you if you do that," he said. "What's the matter, child? Did I frighten you?"
"No," she whispered back. "No. It was only.
"Only?" he said. "Look here, you mustn't cry. It's one better than fainting, I admit, but I'm not going to let you do either if I can help it. Come over here to the window." He led her, unresisting, one steady arm upholding her. "Do you know," he said, "a curious thing happened just now. I'd only been in the house 20 minutes or so when, coming downstairs to look for you, I discovered a letter in the hall addressed to me. I took the liberty of opening and reading it, in spite of the fact that it was plainly intended for the post." He paused. "I thought that would make you angry," he observed, looking down at her critically. She uttered a desperate little laugh, and tried to disengage herself from his arm. "No, I'm glad you've got it," she said rather breathlessly. "It was a very silly letter," remarked Max, calmly frustrating the attempt. "It didn't say half it might have said, and what it did say wasn't to the point."
"Yes, it was," she maintained quickly. It I meant to say just that."
"Then all I can say is that you have quite missed the crux of the situation," said Max. "Why are you very, very sorry? Why do you want me to forgive you? And why in the name of wonder do you suggest that we should become friends when you know that we are so constituted as to be incapable of being anything but the dearest of enemies?" He looked down again suddenly into her quivering, averted face. "Still, I shall value that letter," he said, "if only as a sample of the sweet unreasonableness of women. Are you still very sorry, Olga?" She moved at the utterance of her name, moved, and made a more decided effort to free herself. "Not a bit of good," said Max. "Don't you know I'm waiting for the kiss of peace?"
"I can't," she protested swiftly.
"I can't." "Can't what?" said Max. Her lips were trembling, but she shed no tears. He seemed in some magic fashion to keep her from that.
"I can't kiss you, Max. Really, really," she said.
"Why not?" said Max. She was silent, but he persisted, still holding her pressed to him. "Tell me why not. Is it because you don't want to? Or you think you ought not to? Or because you are just shy?" She caught the smile in his voice and pictured the cocked up corner of his mouth.
"I think I ought not to," she murmured, with her head still turned from him.
"Conscientious objections?" suggested Max.
"Don't laugh," she whispered.
"My dear child, I'm as serious as a judge. What are the objections?"
"There is Noel," she said.
"You will have to chuck Noel," said Max coolly. That vitalized her very effectually. She turned on him with burning cheeks.
"Max, how dare you? How dare you suggest such a thing?"
His eyes met hers, green and dominant. She saw again that old mocking gleam of conscious mastery with which he had been wont to exasperate her. He answered her with a directness almost brutal. "Because you don't love him."
"I do love him," she declared fiercely. "I do love him."
"Better than me?" said Max. She shrank visibly from the question.
"I love him too well to throw him over," she said.
His lips twisted cynically. "That is curious," he said. She winced again from that which he left unsaid.
"Oh, Max, don't hurt me," she pleaded. Try to understand."
It was an appeal for mercy. But Max would not hear. He took her by the shoulders, compelling her to face him. "So you really mean to marry Noel?" he said. "Do you think you will be happy with him?"
"I could never be happy if I didn't," she answered rather incoherently.
Max frowned. "Look here," he said. "It's no good expecting me to understand if you won't even answer my questions." She quivered in his hold.
"You ask such impossible things," she said.
"They are only impossible," Max said relentlessly, "because you are afraid to tell me the truth. You are afraid to tell me that you are sacrificing yourself. You are afraid to be honest, even with yourself."
"I am not," she protested fierily. "Max, you have no right."
"I have a right," he broke in upon her sternly. "I have the first and foremost right. Remember you were mine before you were his. You gave yourself to me because you loved me. You only threw me over because of a fancied unworthiness. Now I am cleared of that, do you think you owe me nothing more than an apology?"
"Oh, but Max," she pleaded, "think of Noel. Think of Noel."
"Well," said Max, "then think of him. Don't you think he can make a better bargain for himself than marriage with a woman who doesn't love him best? Why, nearly every woman he meets falls in love with him, and could offer him more than you do. You women who are so keen on sacrificing yourselves never look at the man's point of view, and so the only thing he really wants you make it impossible for him to get."
"Max, Max!" she cried in distress.
"Well, isn't it so?" said Max. "Just admit that, and p'raps I won't bully you any more. You know he doesn't come first with you, and never would."
"But I could make him happy," she said.
"Oh, could you? And suppose his happiness depended upon yours? Suppose he were man enough to want you to be happy too? Could you do that for him?"
She hesitated.
He pressed on without mercy. "Could you drive me utterly out of your thoughts, your dreams? Could you stifle every regret, every secret longing? Could you empty your heart of me and put him in my place? Tell me, could you?" But she could not tell him. She only turned her face from him, and wept. He set her free then, just as he had set her free on that day long ago when her will had first bruised itself against the iron of his. He went away from her, went to the door as if he would leave her, then stood still, and after a space came back. She trembled at his coming. She had a feeling that he had armed himself with another, stronger weapon to overcome her resistance. He stopped in front of her. "Olga," he said, "have you thought about me at all?" She made a sharp gesture, the involuntary wincing of the victim from the knife. He went on very quietly, as if he had not seen. "Do you think I'm going to be happy without you? I've got my career, haven't I, and all my brilliant successes? How much do you think they are worth to me? How far do you think they are going to satisfy me, make up for that which you have taken away?" He paused, but she could not answer him, could not so much as lift her eyes to his. He went on. "A little while ago you appealed to my love, and I don't claim to be more than human. It stood the strain. I appealed to yours, and you sent me about my business. You had some excuse. I had deceived you. But this time, are you going to do the same this time, Olga?"
"I can't help it," she whispered through her tears.
He came nearer to her, but he did not touch her. "Is that the truth?" he said. "Don't you love me well enough? Is that it? Is my love so little to you that you can afford to throw it away? You know I love you, don't you? You believe in my love?" His voice suddenly vibrated, his hands clenched. "It stood a good deal," he said, "but by heaven, I don't think it will stand this." She lifted her face suddenly.
"Max, stop. I can't bear it."
"Neither can I," he flung back fiercely. "It's too much to ask, too much to give. Olga, you shall come to me. You shall. You shall." He caught her to him with the words, holding her mercilessly in a grip that was savage. She felt the hard, passionate beat of his heart against her own. And she gasped and gasped again, as one suddenly immersed in deep waters. She did not resist him, for she could not. He had her helpless captive before she could even begin. Perhaps she might not have done so in any case. It was a point she never was able to decide. But from the moment his lips met hers, the battle was over. With or without her will, her lips clung to his. The flame of his passion kindled an answering flame in her. And the love which she had striven so desperately to restrain leaped forth to him in wild, exultant freedom, so that she forgot all the world beside. "So that's settled," said Max, a little later, into the flushed face that lay against his shoulder. "It's taken a mighty long time to make you see reason."
"It isn't reason," said Olga faintly. "And oh, Max, what am I going to say to Noel?"
Max's one-sided smile appeared. "I should just say, 'Thank you kindly, sir,' if it were me. There's nothing else left to say."
"Oh, but there is," she protested.
"There isn't," said Max. "He is coming over to congratulate us to-morrow."
"Max!"
She opened her eyes wide and lifted her head.
"Max, you don't mean—"
"Yes, I do," said Max imperturbably. "Why do you suppose I came tearing down here to-night, leaving Kersley to kill all my patients as well as his own?"
"Not, surely, to see me?" said Olga wonderingly.
He laughed grimly. "No, it was to see Noel. Odd how we both put him first, isn't it? The young cub sent me a message that brought me down post haste, expecting to find him in a state of collapse. Instead of which, I found him gaily awaiting me at the station to tell me he had run himself out, or some bosh of the kind, and it was now my innings, and I was to go in and win. On my soul, Olga, he was enjoying himself up to the hilt."
"But why didn't you tell me this before?" said Olga quickly.
Max's mouth went up a little higher. "Various reasons, fair lady."
"Don't be horrid," she protested, giving him a shake. "And how did it happen? How did he come to know anything? I haven't seen him to-day. It must have been Nick."
"Yes. I'm going to throttle Nick, presently. I've often wanted to. After which I shall turn him into a mummy and send him to India to be worshipped as the little god of intrigue. I daresay he'll get on all right in that capacity. It ought to suit him down to the ground. He's a born meddler."
"How absurd you are!"
Olga laughed in spite of herself.
"Where is Nick? Don't you think we had better go and find him?"
It was at this point that the handle of the door was turned ostentatiously the wrong way, struggled with, sworn at, and finally put right. "May I come in?" said Nick, briskly opening the door. "Muriel and I have finished dinner. We knew you wouldn't be wanting any."
"Nick!"
Olga exclaimed.
"I'm sure you haven't."
"All right, we haven't," said Nick. "That is to say, we have saved you a little in case you were prosaic enough to want it. Max, my son, your presence here is an honor for which I have scarcely made fit preparation, but I am none the less proud to entertain you, and as your uncle-in-law elect I bid you welcome." He held out his hand, which Max took with a dry "Thanks." "One can't scrag a man under his own roof, I suppose, though it's a sore temptation." "You will have ample opportunity in the future," Nick assured him genially. "Though, as I think I told you long ago, I'm the most well-meaning little cuss that ever walked the earth. I threatened once to put a spoke in your wheel, didn't I? Well, I never did it. I've been pushing and straining to get it out of the bog ever since. And now I've done it, you want to scrag me. Olga, the man's a bloodthirsty scoundrel. If you have the smallest regard for my feelings, you will kick him out of the house at once." But Olga was holding the two clasped hands in hers, and she would not let them part.
"Nick, you're a darling, a darling. And Max knows it. Don't you, Max? It was dear of you to make the wheels go round. They would never have done it without you, and we shall never, never forget it as long as we two shall live."
"Amen," said Max.
"Bless your hearts," said Nick benevolently.
"Well, come and have something to eat."
He turned towards the door, but Olga hung back. Is Noel here?" she asked.
"Heavens, no," said Nick. "He eloped with Peggy long ago."
"Oh." A note of relief sounded in her voice. "I shall see him to-morrow," she said.
"Yes, he'll be over to-morrow."
Nick shot her a swift look in the twilight.
"Meantime, I have a message to give you from him," he said. So have I," cut in Max.
"I know what it is," said Olga quickly.
"His love," said Max.
"His best love," said Nick. There was an instant's silence in the room. Then Olga bent her head and murmured softly, "God bless him."
30. The line of retreat.
"No," said Daisy with decision. "I shall never like Dr. Wyndham, though I am quite willing to admit that he may be admirable in many ways. He is not my ideal of a nice husband, but then, of course," she dimpled prettily, "I'm only just back from my honeymoon, and I've been thoroughly spoilt."
Will smiled upon her indulgently. "It's just as well we don't like all the same people. He looked happy enough, anyhow."
"In his lordly, cynical fashion," objected Daisy. "He was quite the most self-possessed bridegroom I ever saw."
"Just as well, perhaps," commented Will. "Olga was positively shaking with nervousness. Dr. Jim went grimly armed with a brandy flask and smelling salts."
"Will, did he really?
How like him!" "Yes, Sir Kersley told me. But he added that it is a well-known fact that brides never faint, so Jim's precautions were quite unnecessary. He also said but perhaps it's hardly fair to tell you that."
"What?" said Daisy eagerly. "Of course tell me. Tell me at once, Will."
Will smiled again. "Well, if I must. He told me that Max himself was anything but as serene as he looked, and had been dosing with bromide to steady his nerves." Daisy broke into a laugh.
"No, you certainly shouldn't have told me that. How mean of Sir Kersley. Still, it's nice to know that Max is a little human now and then. I shall like him better now. And so I don't mind telling you something in return. I've been making the most discreet inquiries, and I've unearthed the vaguest rumor of that tale Major Hunt-Goring told me. I believe it was all his own invention, after all."
"Very likely," said Will. "Opium smokers often get delusions."
Daisy caught and kissed her husband's hand. "How very charitable of you, Will. You're a perpetual antidote to my poison. Did you observe Nick during the ceremony? He was grinning like a Hindu idol, just as if he'd done it all."
"He has his finger in most pies," observed Will. "I dare say it wasn't altogether absent from this one. Muriel looked supremely proud of her CSI."
"And she has reason to be," declared Daisy warmly. "He is quite a king in his own line. I'm so glad he got the star."
"It's time he got something of the sort, certainly," said Will. "I suppose he'll be good now for another 6 years. Then he'll send the boy to school and inveigle her back to the East."
But Daisy shook her head. "No, I think she'll keep him now. This country is wanting men very badly, and there's plenty to be done."
"Oh, he's a bulwark of the Empire," smiled Will. "He'll do the work of 10. Where's the kiddie gone?"
"She's somewhere with Noel. Did you see those two come out of church together? It was the sweetest sight," said Daisy with enthusiasm.
"She ought to have been walking with Reggie," observed Will.
"Yes, I'm afraid she deserted him. But he ran after Dr. Jim. They are great pals. But Peggy and Noel—" Daisy suddenly laughed. "Oh, Will, I do love that boy," she said. "It is good to see him his gay, handsome self again. See, there they are together now, sitting on the grass. I wonder what they are talking about."
"Probably discussing today's event," said Will.
"And wishing it had been their turn," laughed Daisy.
A guess which, as it chanced, was not altogether wide of the mark. Peggy, the while she leaned against her cavalier, was remarking at that very moment that she thought Midsummer Day the nicest day in all the year for a
weddin'.
"Why?" said Noel.
"All the fairies get married then," said Peggy.
"Silly little duffers," said Noel unsympathetically. She looked at him round eyed, then slipped a soft hand into his.
"Dear Noel, Don't you like weddin's?"
Noel cut short an involuntary sigh. "Not always, Peggy," he said.
"Not when you're best man, and I'm chief bridesmaid?" persisted Peggy, with her cheek against his shoulder.
He laughed without much gaiety. "Oh, well, of course that makes a difference," he said. There was a pause, during which Peggy rubbed her cheek up and down his coat in tender silence. At last, coaxingly,
"Why didn't you like this weddin', dear Noel?" she asked.
But at that he broke into a half shamed laugh, and springing up, snatched her high into his arms. "I'll tell you when we're married, Pegtop," he promised her. "Till then, let's have some fun."
"Yes, yes,"
cried Peggy, laughing down at him alluringly.
"Let's have some fun."
And that ended the conversation. The End of The Keeper of the Door, by Ethel Dell. Recorded by Celine Major. Thanks for listening.